Patuan, ghosts in a machine of war. There exists, in the chronicles of humanity's endless war, a phenomenon that defies every attempt at categorization. They appear when all hope has died, when the last Vox transmission fades to static, when the final prayer goes unanswered. In those moments, those terrible, absolute moments when reality itself seems to abandon the Imperium, something else arrives, something that burns with fire that should not exist, that fights with a fury beyond flesh, that saves those who have already accepted their deaths. The Legion of the Damned. We speak their name with reverence, with fear, with desperate hope and existential dread intermingled so thoroughly that we cannot separate one from the other. They are saviors who wear the faces of the dead, angels who manifest as walking corpses wreathed in spectral flame, protectors whose very existence raises questions that the Imperium would prefer remain unasked. What are they? Where do they come from? And perhaps most troubling of all, what does their existence reveal about the nature of humanity's struggle in this dark millennium? These are not comfortable questions. They touch upon contradictions that sit at the heart of imperial theology, that challenge our understanding of the warp, that force us to confront the possibility that salvation and damnation might wear the same burning face. But to understand the Legion, to truly comprehend what they represent, we must ask them anyway. We must follow this thread wherever it leads, even if it unravels certainties we have held for millennia. Consider first the most basic observation, the one that every witness reports with trembling voice and shell-shocked eyes. The Legion of the Damned does not arrive by any conventional means. They do not deploy from orbit. They do not march through established webway gates. They do not announce their coming through Vox channels or astropathic choir. Instead, they simply manifest. Reality tears, space folds, and suddenly they are there, as if they had always been there, as if the universe simply forgot they existed until the moment required their presence. At the siege of Vilmarest, when the Orkwar of war boss Grisguts had broken through the final defensive walls and poured into the cathedral district where 10,000 civilians huddled in prayer, they came. Captain Arterion of the Ultramarines watched through his cracked helmet display as reality itself seemed to catch fire. He would later testify quietly to restricted audiences that he saw nothing approach, no drop pods, no teleportation flare. One moment there was only green tide and certain death. The next moment there were 30 space marines clad in black armor, decorated with bones and flames, standing in formation as if they had been standing there all along, simply waiting for the universe to remember them. They fought. Ancestors, how they fought. Arterion described their combat style as impossibly coordinated and utterly silent. No Vox traffic, no tactical discussion, no orders given or received. They moved as one organism, as if sharing a single burning consciousness that transcended the limitations of separate minds. Their bolters never jammed, their ammunition never depleted. And most disturbing of all, when the orcs struck them, when massive choppers cleaved through ceramite and into what should have been flesh, there was no blood, only fire. Only that terrible, unnatural flame that seemed to burn without consuming, that illuminated without casting normal shadows. When the battle ended, when the last orc had been reduced to ash and scorched bone, the Legion did not linger. Arterion attempted to hail them, to offer thanks, to ask the questions that burned in his mind. They ignored him completely. And then, as inexplicably as they had arrived, they simply ceased to be. Reality closed around the space where they had stood, and they were gone, leaving behind only ash and the lingering scent of something that was not quite incense and not quite burning flesh. This pattern repeats across 10,000 battlefields. At the defense of Corotani, when the Tyranid swarm had breached the Hive City's lower levels and consumed everything in their path, the Legion manifested in the central generatorium. They fought for 7 hours straight, never speaking, never resting, their flames burning so bright that the surviving tech priests reported permanent damage to optical sensors from mere proximity. When the Hive Fleet withdrew inexplicably, against all tactical logic, the Legion vanished, leaving behind only scorch marks in the shape of human silhouettes. At the Battle of Carrion Gulf, during the chaos incursion of the Crimson Host, they appeared behind enemy lines at the exact moment when the traitor legionaries were preparing to summon a greater daemon. The ritual was incomplete. The warp rift was unstable. Logic suggested that any intervention would cause a catastrophic breach that would consume both attackers and defenders alike. The Legion attacked anyway. They fought not just the cultists and chaos marines, but the daemon trying to claw its way into reality. Witnesses reported that their flames seemed to hurt the warp spawn in ways that conventional weapons could not, that the daemon screamed not with pain, but with something closer to recognition, as if it knew these burning specters, as if it feared them with a terror that transcended even its otherworldly existence. 3 examples. 3 impossible manifestations. 3 scenarios where conventional military intervention would have been too late, too slow, or simply insufficient against the threats arrayed against humanity. And in each case, the Legion appeared at the exact moment, not before, not after, when their presence would make the difference between annihilation and survival. This precision raises uncomfortable questions. How do they know? How do they choose which battles to fight, which defenders to save? The Imperium loses thousands of engagements every day. Millions die screaming for salvation that never comes. Entire worlds burn while the Legion fights on some distant battlefield, saving people who may be no more or less worthy of salvation than those who die forgotten. What cosmic calculus determines their deployment? What unfathomable intelligence decides that these soldiers, this moment, this particular convergence of tragedy and necessity, deserves intervention? Some theorize random chance. That the Legion appears wherever the warp's tides happen to carry them, with no more deliberate intent than a piece of driftwood washing up on a particular shore. This explanation offers comfort in its denial of agency, its refusal to suggest that some intelligence makes these terrible choices, but it fails to account for the precision of their arrivals. Driftwood does not materialize at the exact moment the dam breaks. Random chance does not position 30 spectral warriors in the perfect formation to counter an enemy's tactical weakness. Others suggest divine guidance. That the God Emperor himself directs these burning angels, that they serve as his will made manifest in moments when conventional imperial forces cannot reach. This explanation aligns neatly with imperial theology, transforms the Legion into proof of the Emperor's continued intervention in human affairs. But it too falters under scrutiny. If the Emperor can direct the Legion, why does he not send them more often? Why do so many die without witnessing their spectral fire? Why does divine intervention arrive with such terrible selectivity? The paradox deepens when we examine what the Legion actually kiss. Every piece of evidence suggests they are space marines, once Nas. Their armor bears the heraldry and marking systems consistent with Astartes chapters. Their combat doctrine mirrors the tactical frameworks taught in chapter monasteries. Their weapons match the standard patterns issued to space marine forces. But they are also undeniably wrong. Space Marines are creatures of flesh enhanced by gene seed and surgical modification. The Legion seems to be creatures of fire and smoke, wearing the memory of flesh, inhabiting armor that functions more as vessel than protection. The most persistent theory links them to the Firehawks chapter, a proud and honored force that vanished in the warp while traveling to aid the Badab War in M. The entire chapter ships, equipment, 10 companies of Astartes disappeared into a warp storm and was never seen again. Officially declared lost with all hands, remembered as heroes who died in service to the Imperium. But approximately 5 years after their disappearance, reports began emerging of burning space marines appearing at desperate battles. Warriors clad in black and bone, fighting with tactics that matched Firehawk's doctrine, manifesting wherever hope had died. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. The armor markings, when visible through the flames, show patterns consistent with Firehawk's heraldry. The tactical preferences mirror recorded Firehawk's engagements. And most damningly, some witnesses report seeing names and company designations that match the Firehawks chapter roster, brothers who were officially declared killed in action years before. Captain Cortez of the Firehawks, Sergeant Amadeus, Brother Leonid of the 6th Company, names carved on memorial stones across multiple worlds, names spoken in remembrance ceremonies. Names that belong to the dead. And yet these names appear on the armor of the Legion, visible for brief moments before the flames obscure them again, taunting us with the possibility of recognition, with the terrible hope that the lost might somehow return. But if the Legion are the Firehawks, then we must confront what that transformation implies. What happened in that warp storm? What did those space marines encounter in the Imperium that would transform them from warriors of flesh and gene seed into these burning spectral entities? The warp is the realm of daemons and nightmares, of energies that corrupt and twist everything they touch. For the Firehawks to survive, If survival is even the right word, they would have had to endure exposure to forces that break minds and destroy souls. Imagine it. 10 companies of space marines, the finest warriors humanity can produce, trapped in a realm where reality has no fixed meaning, where time flows backward and forward simultaneously, where thought becomes substance and nightmare becomes flesh. How long were they there? Subjective time in the warp bears no relation to real space. They might have fought for days, for years, for millennia. They might have experienced geological epochs of horror compressed into a single shipboard moment. The human mind cannot truly comprehend such duration, such absolute isolation from everything that defines existence. What would that do to someone? To be cut off from the Astronomican's light, from the Emperor's presence that every space marine feels in their souls. To be surrounded by entities that hunger for their very essence, that promise release through corruption, that whisper that all their suffering could end if they would only surrender, only accept demonic patronage, only stop fighting the inevitable. How does someone resist that? How does faith survive when every moment brings fresh evidence that the universe has abandoned you? Perhaps it doesn't survive, not intact, not in any form that would be recognizable to those who knew them before. Perhaps what we call the Legion of the Damned represents something far more terrible than simple survival. Perhaps they endured something in that warp storm that transformed them so fundamentally that they exist now in a state between life and death, between salvation and damnation, between being the Emperor's servant and being something else entirely. The tragedy is not that they died. Death is common enough in the Imperium. We mourn the fallen, we remember their sacrifice, but we understand that death serves the Emperor just as life does. The tragedy is that they might not have died at all, that they might exist in some liminal state, unable to rest, unable to truly live, bound to manifest again and again at humanity's darkest moments without ever knowing peace, without ever receiving the release that death should have provided. Consider Brother Leonid if the witnesses who report his name on Legion armor are to be believed. Before the warp storm, he was a proud Astartes of the 6th Company, a warrior who had served the Imperium for 3 centuries, who had earned 17 campaign badges and the respect of his battle brothers. He had hopes, insofar as Space Marines allow themselves such things. He hoped to eventually serve in his chapter's 1st Company, to earn Terminator honors, to stand alongside the greatest heroes of his brotherhood. He had a personality, quirks that made him distinct from his brothers, an unusual appreciation for ancient Terran music, a habit of speaking prayers in High Gothic rather than the common tongue, small things that made him human despite his post-human enhancements. Now, if he exists at all, he is a burning thing that manifests at battles he did not choose, fights enemies he has no personal connection to, and vanishes back into whatever unreality spawned him without ever speaking, without ever indicating whether any fragment of the brother he was remains within the specter he has become. Does he remember his hopes? Does he know his name? When he fights, does he fight for the Emperor and the Imperium he once served? Or does he fight because fighting is all that remains, because the alternative is to confront the full horror of what he has become? We cannot know. The Legion does not speak. They do not explain. They simply arrive, fight, and vanish, leaving behind only questions and the terrible suspicion that the line between salvation and damnation might be thinner than we ever imagined. The Ecclesiarchy officially classifies the Legion as Imperial Saints, as blessed warriors returned from death to serve the God Emperor's will. This classification is convenient. It allows the Imperium to accept their aid without confronting the theological complications their existence represents. Saints are understandable. Saints fit within established doctrine. Saints can be celebrated without raising uncomfortable questions about the nature of the warp, about what happens to those who die in the Immaterium, about whether the Emperor's protection truly extends to those who fall beyond the Astronomican's light. But calling them saints does not make them saints. It simply lets us avoid asking what they truly are. The deeper we look, the more the contradictions multiply. The Legion fights with weapons that should not function, bolters that fire indefinitely without reloading, chainswords that never run out of fuel, flamers that produce fire more intense than any promethium mixture, fire that seems to burn with warp stuff itself rather than conventional chemistry. Their armor shows battle damage, rents torn by Xenos claws, blast marks from plasma fire, corruption spreading from chaos weapons. But this damage never worsens, never forces them to retreat for repairs. It simply exists, frozen in the moment of its infliction, a permanent record of every wound they have ever received and somehow survived. Even space marine armor, crafted by the finest tech priests with ancient knowledge and blessed by sacred rituals, requires maintenance. It needs repairs, replacement parts, reconsecration after exposure to chaos taint. The Legion's wargear seems to exist outside these requirements, functioning according to rules that do not apply to material reality. As if the weapons and armor are not truly objects, but rather memories of objects, ideas given temporary form through whatever force sustains these burning specters. The Adeptus Mechanicus has attempted to study this phenomenon. After the Battle of Carrion Gulf, tech priests recovered ash and debris from the sites where Legion members had stood. Analysis revealed organic compounds inconsistent with human remains, trace elements that do not appear in any known Astartes gene seed, and strange resonances that suggest it, but could not confirm. Warp contamination at a fundamental level. One Magos, whose name has been redacted from official records, proposed that the Legion represents a form of stable warp manifestation, entities that maintain coherence through mechanisms similar to daimonic possession but directed toward different ends. The Inquisition executed him for heresy within a week of his proposal becoming public. This reaction tells us something important. The Imperium does not want to understand the Legion, it wants to use them to benefit from their intervention without confronting what their intervention implies. Because if we truly examined what they are, if we honestly assess the evidence, we might discover truths that would shatter foundational beliefs about the nature of the warp, about the Emperor's protection, about what happens to those who serve the Imperium beyond the point where conventional service becomes possible. So, we maintain comfortable fictions. We call them saints and ignore that saints should not burn with unnatural fire. We accept their aid and pretend not to notice that they never stay to be thanked, never linger to hear prayers of gratitude, never demonstrate any of the behaviors we would expect from blessed servants of the Emperor. We celebrate their victories and carefully do not ask what victories might cost beings who have already paid prices we cannot imagine, but the questions remain. They haunt us like the Legion haunts battlefields. Why do they fight? If they are truly the Firehawks lost in the warp, why did they not simply die? What force or will or desperate choice keeps them manifesting in real space, keeps them fighting humanity's battles long after any reasonable hope of return should have died? Do they serve the Emperor? Do they serve themselves? Or do they serve something else entirely, something that happens to align its interests with humanity's survival often enough that we mistake it for loyalty? The paradox at the heart of the Legion is this: they are simultaneously our greatest hope and our deepest failure. Hope, because they appear when all other hope has died, because they fight battles that no conventional force could win. Failure, because their very existence suggests that the Imperium's protection is incomplete, that warriors can be lost so thoroughly that they exist in this terrible liminal state, and that we lack the courage to truly acknowledge what we have done to them or what they have become. Perhaps that is why they do not speak. Not because they cannot, but because anything they might say would force us to confront these contradictions, would force us to admit that salvation and damnation might share the same burning face, would require us to acknowledge that the Imperium's rhetoric about heroic sacrifice might mask horrors we dare not examine too closely, and yet they continue to appear. Continue to fight, continue to save lives that would otherwise be lost. Whatever they are, whatever they have become, they still serve, still protect, still manifest at humanity's darkest hours to turn impossible defeats into unlikely victories. This is not simple altruism. Nothing in this universe operates on such pure motivations. But neither is it simple compulsion, the mechanical repetition of combat routines by entities that have lost all capacity for choice. The Legion's actions suggest intelligence, tactical awareness, even something that might be interpreted as care for those they defend. They fight with precision, they coordinate with Imperial forces when necessary. They prioritize civilian protection over enemy elimination when the situation demands it. These are not the actions of mindless automatons, nor are they the actions of daemons despite some surface similarities. Daemons hunger, they corrupt, they twist everything they touch toward their patron god's particular obsession. The Legion does none of these things. They arrive clean, fight clean, and depart clean, leaving behind no taint, no corruption, no lingering presence that might poison those they saved. So what does that make them? Warriors who died but refused to stay dead? Martyrs sustained by faith so absolute that it transcends the normal boundaries between life and death? Mistakes of fate? Accidents of warp travel that created something the universe never intended? Or something else entirely, something that defies our categories and challenges our fundamental assumptions about what is possible? These questions have no easy answers. They spiral outward into deeper mysteries, touching on the nature of the warp itself, on the relationship between belief and reality in a universe where thoughts can become tangible, on the terrible prices extracted from those who serve the Imperium beyond the bounds of normal human or even post-human endurance. But perhaps the most unsettling question is the simplest one. If the Legion are indeed the Firehawks, transformed by whatever they experienced in the warp storm, are they still loyal? Do they still serve the Emperor they knew before their transformation? Or do they serve something else now, something that wears the face of the Emperor but might be subtly, terribly different? How would we even know? How? Would we distinguish genuine loyalty from perfect imitation, service from mockery, salvation from the cruelest possible trap? We cannot. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the Legion exists precisely to force us to confront our own uncertainty, to admit that in a universe as vast and strange as this one, there are forces and entities that transcend our ability to categorize, that demand faith not because we can prove their intentions, but because we have no choice except to trust them when they appear in our darkest moments. This ambiguity is not comfortable, but comfort is a luxury the Imperium has never been able to afford. We exist in a state of permanent emergency, surrounded by horrors that seek our extinction. In such circumstances, perhaps we should be grateful for the Legion's interventions rather than questioning their nature too closely. Perhaps it is enough that they fight for humanity regardless of what they have become or why they continue to manifest. But that gratitude does not erase the questions. It cannot restore peace to whatever remains of the brothers who were lost in that warp storm. It does not explain the mechanics of their manifestation or the cost of their continued existence. It simply lets us defer these mysteries to another day, another crisis, another moment when we have the luxury of contemplating philosophical implications rather than fighting for immediate survival. Yet even as we defer, the questions multiply. Each new appearance of the Legion adds fresh evidence, fresh contradictions, fresh reasons to wonder what we are truly witnessing. And slowly, inexorably, we approach a reckoning. A moment when the accumulation of mysteries will demand resolution, when the contradictions will become too severe to ignore, when we will be forced to confront not just what the Legion is, but what their existence reveals about the Imperium itself, about the forces we serve, about the prices we exact from those who fight in humanity's name. That moment draws closer. We can feel it in the pattern of their appearances, in the increasing frequency of their manifestations, in the growing desperation of the battles they fight. Something is changing. Something is building toward a climax that we can sense but not yet comprehend. The Legion burns brighter with each appearance, as if whatever sustains them grows stronger or perhaps more desperate. And when that moment arrives, when the truth can no longer be deferred or ignored, we will discover whether the Legion of the Damned represents humanity's salvation or its most terrible mistake. Chapter 2. The Arithmetic of Salvation. If we track their appearances, and some have tried, that the Ordo Malleus discourages such documentation, a pattern emerges. Not a comfortable pattern, not one that suggests divine providence or random chance, something else entirely. The Legion manifests most frequently at battles where Imperial forces face overwhelming odds against chaos corruption. Second most common are engagements against Tyranid swarms at critical infrastructure points. Third, Orc invasions where civilian populations face imminent massacre. Rarely do they appear against Tau expansion forces. Almost never against Necron awakening scenarios. This selectivity is curious, troubling. It suggests that whoever or whatever directs the Legion's deployment operates according to priorities that do not align perfectly with the Imperium's strategic interests. Consider the massacre at Hollow Hive 7. A Necron tomb complex had awakened beneath the primary manufacturing district, threatening to exterminate 2 billion workers and collapse production for an entire subsector. The Imperium responded with 3 guard regiments, 2 knight households, and detachments from the Crimson Fist chapter. The battle lasted 11 days. Casualties exceeded 40%. Not once did the Legion appear, despite desperate vox calls, despite priests praying themselves hoarse for intervention, despite commanders invoking every oath and desperate plea they could remember. The Imperium won, barely, but at tremendous cost in lives and materiel. 3 weeks later, on a backwater agri-world called Thessian's Reach, a chaos cult numbering perhaps 300 deviants attempted to summon a daemon through a corrupted shrine. The local PDF had the situation contained. Reinforcements were en route. Victory was all but assured. The Legion manifested anyway, appearing in the shrine's central chamber and annihilating the cultists with such thorough brutality that investigators later found genetic material vaporized at the molecular level. They fought for perhaps 15 minutes, then vanished, leaving local commanders baffled about why spectral intervention had been necessary for what amounted to routine heretic suppression. Why? What calculation makes 300 cultists in a barn more worthy of intervention than 2 billion citizens facing Necron extermination? The most common explanation suggests that the Legion specifically targets chaos threats, that their nature, whatever it might be, gives them particular effectiveness against warp-spawned enemies. This makes tactical sense. We saw at Carrion Gulf how their flames seem to harm daemons in ways conventional weapons could not. Perhaps they exist as a specialized force, crafted or transformed specifically to fight the ruinous powers. But this explanation feels incomplete. It accounts for their effectiveness, but not their selectivity. If the Legion truly served as anti-chaos specialists under Imperial command, they would deploy to every major daemonic incursion, every Black Crusade engagement, every moment when the warp threatens to spill into real space. Instead, they appear at some chaos battles and ignore others, according to logic that remains opaque to human understanding. Lieutenant Cassian of the Mordian Iron Guard survived an encounter with the Legion at the Battle of Shroud's Edge, where a Wordbearer's warband had corrupted an entire planetary defense force and turned them against the Loyalist garrison. He described the experience in his private journal, seized after his death by inquisitorial agents and classified as restricted material, though excerpts have leaked through various channels. "They came from nowhere," Cassian wrote. "One moment we were dying, heretics pushing through our last barricade, their chaplain chanting blasphemies that made our ears bleed. Next moment, the air Tauric. Like reality was fabric and something had slashed it with burning claws. They stepped through, no, not stepped, emerged. Like they'd always been there, but we'd only just noticed, 30 of them, maybe more, hard to count. The flames made it difficult to focus, made my eyes water and my head pound." Cassian watched them fight. He noted their silence, their coordination, the way they moved with inhuman precision despite lacking any visible communication. What disturbed him most was their apparent disregard for Imperial casualties. During the battle, 3 Mordian squads were caught in crossfire between the Legion and the Wordbearers. The Legion did not adjust their firing patterns, did not attempt to protect the guardsmen. They fought with absolute focus on destroying the Chaos forces, and if Imperial soldiers died in the process, that seemed to register as acceptable losses. "I ordered my men to fall back," Cassian wrote, "not from the heretics, from our saviors, because I realized they weren't saving us, not really. They were killing heretics, and we just happened to be nearby. If we got caught in their righteous fire, I don't think they would have cared, or maybe they couldn't care anymore. Maybe whatever made them human died long ago, and all that's left is the hate, the endless, burning hate for the traitors who worship the dark gods." This observation cuts to something essential about the Legion's nature. They fight with what appears to be tactical brilliance, but they demonstrate no empathy, no concern for those caught in their wake. Space Marines are post-human, trained to prioritize mission success over individual lives. But even the sternest chapter master recognizes that Imperial Guard and civilian populations have value, that needless casualties undermine the Imperium's strategic position. The Legion seems to operate without this consideration. They fight like beings for whom only the enemy matters, for whom everything else is backdrop, scenery to be ignored or moved through on the way to their true targets. This becomes more pronounced when we examine engagements where the Legion fights alongside loyalist Astartes. At the defense of Bastion Infernus, the Salamander's Third Company and the Legion found themselves combating the same Alpha Legion infiltration force. The Salamanders, true to their chapter culture, prioritized protecting civilians trapped in the battle zone. They established evacuation corridors, assigned squads to shield retreating refugees, accepted tactical disadvantages to minimize collateral damage. The Legion ignored all of this. They pursued Alpha Legion operators through civilian sectors without pausing to evacuate bystanders. They deployed flamers in hub blocks where families huddled in prayer. They cornered enemy forces in locations where explosive munitions would cause maximum structural damage. Captain Tushan himself attempted to coordinate with them to integrate their assault with Salamander protective operations. They did not respond, did not acknowledge him. fought as if the salamanders did not exist. The Alpha Legion was annihilated. 47 civilians died in the crossfire. The salamanders, bound by their chapter's values, provided funerary rites and compensation to survivors. The Legion vanished before the last enemy corpse had cooled, leaving Tushan standing in burning rubble, questioning whether intervention that costs innocent lives can truly be called salvation. Yet we must be careful not to judge too quickly. These are not normal warriors fighting normal wars. If the Legion truly are the Firehawks, or something created from their remains, then they endured experiences that break any meaningful comparison to loyalist Astarte psychology. They died in the warp. Or didn't die, which might be worse. They exist now in a state that defies natural law, sustained by mechanisms we cannot understand, fighting for reasons we can only guess at. Perhaps their apparent disregard for collateral damage is not callousness but focus. The absolute, terrible focus of beings who have seen horrors beyond mortal comprehension and emerged with a single purpose burned into whatever remains of their consciousness. Kill chaos, destroy the heretic, annihilate the daemon. Everything else, loyalty to the Imperium, protection of civilians, even their own survival, has become secondary to this imperative. This interpretation is almost comforting. It transforms their coldness into tragic necessity, suggests that they still serve humanity, even if they no longer serve it with humanity. But comfort and truth are not always aligned. The uncomfortable alternative is that the Legion fights not out of noble purpose, but because fighting is all they have left. Because whatever they experienced in the warp stripped away every other aspect of their being, leaving only the capacity for violence, the muscle memory of warfare, the endless repetition of kill sequences without any deeper meaning or motivation. Imagine existing in such a state, consciousness reduced to targeting protocols and threat assessment. Memory compressed to tactical doctrine and weapon maintenance procedures. Everything that made you a person, hopes, fears, relationships, beliefs burned away, leaving only the hollow shell of a warrior going through motions that no longer carry purpose beyond their own execution. Is that mercy or damnation? Is it better to exist as a weapon that has forgotten why it fights, or to not exist at all? These questions have no good answers. They force us to confront possibilities we would prefer to ignore, to acknowledge that salvation itself can be a form of torture when extended indefinitely. The theological implications multiply when we consider what the ecclesiarchy teaches about death and martyrdom. According to imperial doctrine, those who die in service to the emperor are rewarded with place at his side, their souls ascending to become part of his eternal host. Death is not an ending, but a transition, the moment when faithful service in the material realm gives way to eternal service in whatever form the emperor requires. This belief sustains the Imperium. It makes bearable the constant sacrifice, the endless wars, the certainty that billions will die so that trillions might survive. But what does the Legion's existence say about this doctrine? If they are spirits returned from death, why do they return as burning specters rather than ascending to the Emperor's side? What does their manifestation suggest about the nature of death in a universe where the warp is real, where consciousness can persist beyond bodily dissolution? Where the boundary between life and death is less wall than membrane, Cardinal Vastin of the Ecclesiarchy attempted to address these questions in a treatise titled On the Nature of Blessed Warriors. He argued that the Legion represents a special category of martyrs, warriors so devoted that even death cannot end their service, whose faith is so absolute that it sustains them beyond normal mortal limits. They are, he suggested, proof of the Emperor's power to preserve his servants, evidence that loyalty transcends even the dissolution of flesh. This interpretation became official doctrine within 6 months of its publication. It is taught in Schola Progenium across the Imperium. It appears in prayer books and catechisms. It has become the accepted explanation for what the Legion is and why they fight. It is also almost certainly incomplete at best and deliberately misleading at worst. Cardinal Vastin had access to restricted reports about the Legion's behavior, about their coldness toward imperial casualties, about their refusal to communicate with loyalist forces, about the disturbing similarities between their manifestation and certain categories of warp phenomena. He chose to omit these details from his treatise, chose to present a sanitized version that aligned with desired theological conclusions rather than observed evidence. 6 weeks after his treatise became official doctrine, he suffered a fatal accident in his private chapel. The Inquisition investigated briefly and concluded there was no foul play. Draw your own conclusions about what that timing suggests. The pattern repeats across official and semi-official analyses of the Legion. Information is shaped, inconvenient details are omitted, questions that might destabilize comfortable narratives are redirected or suppressed. The Imperium wants the Legion to be saints, wants them to serve as proof of the Emperor's continued intervention. Wants them to fit into existing theological frameworks without requiring painful reassessment of foundational beliefs. But reality cares nothing for what we want. The Legion exists as they are, not as we wish them to be. And what they are, based on available evidence stripped of theological wishful thinking, appears to be something far stranger and more troubling than simple saints returned from death. They demonstrate capabilities that exceed even space marine norms. At the siege of Cardinal's Fall, witnesses reported Legion members surviving weapons, hits that should have been instantly fatal. A las cannon blast struck one directly in the chest, burning through ceramite and into whatever lay beneath. The warrior stumbled. Flames burst more intensely from the wound. Then he continued fighting, apparently unharmed, the injury already fading as if it had never existed. Brother Sergeant Malcor of the Black Templars witnessed a Legion member fall into a manufacturum's plasma furnace during the Battle of Forge Tertius. The warrior vanished into temperatures that would vaporize ceramite in seconds. Malcor assumed him destroyed. 3 minutes later, the same warrior, identifiable by unique damage patterns on his armor, emerged from the furnace wreathed in flames more intense than before, unharmed, continuing his assault without pause. These are not behaviors consistent with enhanced but still fundamentally biological warriors. Space Marines are resilient, yes. Their armor protects them from tremendous damage. Their gene seed allows them to survive injuries that would kill normal humans, but they have limits. They can be destroyed. Remove enough tissue, damage enough organs, expose them to sufficient temperature or radiation or kinetic force, and they die. The Legion does not appear to share these limitations. They fight as if injury is irrelevant, as if the normal rules of biology and physics do not constrain them. This suggests they are not merely altered Space Marines, but something categorically different, entities that wear the form of Astartes warriors while operating according to fundamentally different principles. The Mechanicus classification proposed and suppressed by the executed Magos might be closer to truth than the Inquisition wanted to admit. If the Legion are stable, warp manifestations, entities given form through mechanisms similar to daemonic possession but directed by different forces, then many of their inexplicable characteristics suddenly become comprehensible. Their invulnerability reflects not biological resilience, but the stability of their manifestation. Their silence suggests not psychological trauma, but fundamental inability to communicate in conventional ways. Their sudden appearances and disappearances mark not advanced technology, but transitions between material reality and wherever they exist when not manifesting in real space. This interpretation makes them no less real, no less effective as warriors, but it reclassifies them from altered humans to something else entirely. Something that might once have been human but has transcended or been forced beyond the normal boundaries of human existence. The question then becomes, if they are warp entities, what sustains them? Daemons are sustained by their patron gods, by the emotions and energies that feed the chaos powers. What feeds the Legion? What keeps them stable, prevents them from dissipating or becoming corrupted like every other thing that dwells too long in the immaterium? The most disturbing theory suggests they are sustained by faith. Not their own faith necessarily, but the faith of those who witness them, who speak their legends, who pray for salvation and receive burning angels as answer. Every time someone tells the story of the Legion's intervention, every time a priest invokes them in sermon, every time a desperate soldier prays for their appearance, that faith generates psychic energy. Belief made tangible, hope crystallized into warp stuff, and that energy flows back to sustain them, to keep them manifesting, to fuel the flames that grant them form and purpose. If true, this creates a feedback loop of terrible elegance. The Legion saves Imperial forces. Those forces spread legends of spectral saviors. The legends generate faith. The faith sustains the Legion, which allows them to save more forces, which spreads more legends, which generates more faith. On, a self-perpetuating cycle that requires no divine intervention, no conscious direction, only the accumulated belief of countless humans desperate for salvation in a hostile universe. But this theory raises new questions even as it answers old ones. If faith sustains them, whose faith? Is it collective, the diffuse belief of billions contributing small amounts of psychic energy? Or is it focused, the burning conviction of particular individuals or groups? And most critically, what happens if that faith falters? If the Imperium stopped believing in the Legion, stopped telling their stories, stopped praying for their intervention, would they simply cease to exist? Would they fade like dreams upon waking, all that sacrifice and suffering and continued service simply ending because no one remembered to believe? We cannot test this. The Imperium will not risk losing whatever the Legion provides, even if understanding them requires experiments that might threaten their continued existence. So we preserve the mystery through enforced ignorance, maintain the legends through careful propaganda, and hope that the faith sustaining them never wavers enough to discover what happens when belief dies. The arithmetic of salvation, then, is not simple mathematics. It is not a question of deploying sufficient force to overcome enemy numbers. It involves factors we barely understand: faith and warp mechanics, belief and manifestation, the complex interplay between material reality and immaterial energies. The Legion appears where these factors align, where need and faith and some unfathomable targeting mechanism coincide to make their manifestation possible. And if occasionally innocent people die in their wake, if sometimes they arrive too late or ignore pleas for intervention, if their methods seem harsh and their nature disturbing, these are prices the Imperium has proven willing to pay. Because for all their mysteries and troubling implications, the Legion wins battles that should be lost, saves lives that should be forfeited, stands between humanity and extinction in moments when no one else can stand. That is enough. For the desperate commanders who pray for their intervention, for the terrified civilians who witness their arrival, for the Imperium that benefits from their service while carefully not examining it too closely, enough to accept them, to celebrate them, to weave them into mythology and doctrine without asking too many uncomfortable questions about what accepting them says about us, about our faith, about the compromises we make in the name of survival. But the questions remain. They accumulate like ash from the Legion's flames, settling into corners, refusing to be entirely swept away. Each new manifestation adds fresh mystery. Each victory comes with fresh cost. Each salvation carries the taste of something we cannot quite identify, something that might be triumph or might be something else entirely, something we lack the courage or context to name. Perhaps that is the final irony. We call them the Legion of the Damned, acknowledging in their very name the possibility that they are cursed rather than blessed, damned rather than saved. Yet we pray for them anyway, welcome their intervention anyway, accept whatever they are and whatever they do, because the alternative facing our enemies without them is too terrible to contemplate. We damn ourselves through that acceptance. We admit that survival matters more than understanding, that victory justifies alliance with forces we cannot fully comprehend or control. We become complicit in whatever tragedy sustains them, whatever price they pay for their continued manifestation, whatever compromises with universal law or divine plan their existence represents. And still they come, still they fight, still they burn with fire that illuminates nothing, reveals nothing, answers nothing. They are the light that casts no shadows, the salvation that offers no comfort, the answer that generates only more questions. They are what we have made, what we need, what we deserve. And they are coming more frequently now, answering calls we have not yet made, appearing at battles not yet fought, as if time itself is breaking down around them. As if the membrane between when they exist and when they manifest is growing thinner. But to understand why their manifestations accelerate, we must return to the beginning. To the moment when the Firehawks entered that cursed warp storm and everything that followed. To the transformation that made them what they are. To the truth that the Imperium has spent centuries trying to bury. Chapter 3. Into the Storm. The Firehawks were not special. This matters. They were not the greatest chapter, not the most honored, not the most accomplished in the annals of Astartes' glory. They were competent, professional, proud of their heritage but not arrogant about their capabilities. A mid-tier chapter that had served the Imperium faithfully for millennia, winning battles through solid tactics and stubborn determination rather than spectacular heroism. Chapter Master Stibor Lazarek commanded approximately 800 Marines across 9 companies when the call came from the Segmentum Command. The Badab War was escalating. Loyalist forces required reinforcement. The Firehawks would deploy immediately, traveling through the warp to reach the conflict zone before the traitor forces could consolidate their positions. Standard deployment, routine orders, the kind of mission the chapter had executed hundreds of times before. They boarded their fleet. 3 strike cruisers, 2 rapid strike vessels, various support craft, a modest but capable flotilla. Chief Navigator Radir plotted the course, a relatively straightforward translation through stable warp routes. Anticipated travel time, 3 weeks shipboard, approximately 6 weeks real space. Well within safe parameters. The Astronomican's light burned steady. The Gellerfields tested at full strength. Every augury and divination suggested a routine voyage. They entered the warp on schedule. They never reached their destination. What actually happened during that voyage is unknown. The Firehawks' ships never emerged at their target coordinates. No distress signals were received. No escape pods or debris were recovered. For months, the Imperium assumed the entire chapter had been lost with all hands, victims of some warp storm or demonic predation. Memorial services were held. Their names were carved into monuments. The Imperium mourned and moved on, as it always does, because in a galaxy of constant war, grief is a luxury measured in minutes before the next crisis demands attention. But some in the Administratum noticed anomalies. Reports filtered in from across the segmentum of ships matching Firehawks' descriptions, appearing briefly on long-range augurs before vanishing again. Distress signals detected broadcasting on Firehawks' encryption frequencies, fragmentary and impossible to triangulate. Astropathic whispers that might have been cries for help or might have been echoes of minds broken beyond recovery. These reports were classified, suppressed. Officially, the Firehawks were dead. Unofficially, something terrible was happening to them in the warp, and the Imperium lacked both the capability and the courage to intervene. We must imagine what they experienced. Imagine because we cannot know, because those who might tell us do not speak, because the truth of their suffering exists now only in whatever consciousness remains within those burning specters. But imagination informed by knowledge of the warp, by understanding of what happens to those trapped in the immaterium, can sketch the outlines of their horror. The translation begins normally. The ship shudders as it pierces the barrier between real and unreal. The Geller field activates, creating a bubble of sanity in the madness of the warp. Inside this field, physical laws continue to function. Time flows forward. Cause precedes effect. The crew can breathe and think and exist without their minds shattering from direct exposure to raw chaos, but something goes wrong. Perhaps the warp route navigator Radir selected encounters an unexpected storm. Perhaps some demonic intelligence deliberately targets the Firehawks fleet. Perhaps it is simply catastrophic bad luck, the random malevolence of a universe that does not care about human survival. Regardless of cause, the result is the same. The Geller fields begin to fail, not catastrophically, not all at once. That might be kinder. Instead, they fail slowly, progressively, allowing the warp to seep in gradually. First come the sounds. Voices whispering in languages that should not exist, speaking promises and threats that bypass rational thought and burrow directly into primal fear centers. The temperature fluctuates wildly. Frost forms on bulkheads, then melts into steam, then freezes again according to no pattern except chaos itself. Brother Captain Cortez, commanding the strike cruiser Rapturous Rex, would have been among the first to recognize the danger. His centuries of experience would tell him that these symptoms indicate critical Geller field degradation. He orders full emergency protocols, all personnel to sealed sections, tech priests to strengthen the field generators. The ship must return to real space immediately, even if it means emerging light years from any safe harbor. But the navigators cannot find the exit. This is not supposed to be possible. A trained navigator can always sense the materium, can guide a ship back to real space even through the worst warp storms. It is their fundamental gift, the psychic mutation that makes human warp travel feasible. Yet Navigator Radir, his third eye bleeding from the strain, reports that he cannot find real space. It is as if the material universe has ceased to exist, or perhaps as if the ship has traveled so far into the warp that the distance back has become infinite. They are lost. Truly, absolutely lost in a realm where human concepts of navigation have no meaning. Days pass, or weeks, or seconds. Time becomes unstable inside ships with degrading Geller fields. Crew members experience the same conversation multiple times, never quite realizing they are repeating themselves. Others age years in moments, their hair graying and faces wrinkling as subjective time accelerates around them. The Space Marines, protected by their enhanced physiology and iron discipline, resist better than the human crew. But even they begin to feel the pressure, the sense that reality itself is dissolving, that everything they knew about existence is being proven wrong by their simple, continued presence in this terrible place. The daemons come. Of course they do. That is what daemons do. They are drawn to Gellerfield failures like predators to wounded prey. At first, they merely watch, pressing against the weakening barriers, their forms visible through walls that have become translucent, their hunger palpable even through layers of blessed steel and consecrated ceramite. The firehawks prepare for boarding actions. They establish kill zones and overlapping fields of fire. They ready blessed bolts and consecrated blades. They are space marines. They do not fear. They do not yield. Then the daemons breach, not in one location, in dozens, hundreds. Wherever the Gellerfield has weakened sufficiently, reality tears and nightmares pour through, plague bearers festering with disease, bloodletters thirsting for slaughter. Horrors that defy description, entities so alien that human perception cannot process their true forms and instead substitutes approximations drawn from phobia and nightmare. The firehawks fight. Emperor's mercy, how they fight. For hours or days or eternities, they hold the line against an enemy that respawns endlessly, that reforms after destruction, that laughs at wounds that would kill any material foe. Brother kills daemon, daemon returns. Brother kills daemon again. The cycle repeats until the bolter runs dry, until the chainsword's teeth break, until the brother himself falls to accumulated wounds that even gene seed enhancement cannot overcome. But they do not die. This is the first horror. Space Marines can die, should die. Their bodies are resilient, but not immortal. Sufficient damage will shut down even their redundant organ systems. Yet in the warp, death behaves differently. Brother Amadeus falls, his body torn by daemon claws, his primary and secondary hearts both destroyed. He should be dead. But in this place where thought becomes substance, where belief can reshape matter, the absolute conviction that he is a space marine, that space marines do not die easily, that he must continue fighting. This conviction sustains him beyond biological death. His corpse rises, continues fighting. Driven not by life but by will, by faith, by refusal to accept the ending that should have come. This happens again and again throughout the fleet. Marines fall and rise, die and continue. Their bodies become less flesh and more idea, less biological and more conceptual. The warp is rewriting them at a fundamental level, responding to their absolute determination to keep fighting by transforming them into beings for whom fighting is all that remains. Chapter Master Lazaric realizes what is happening. He sees his brothers becoming something else, losing their humanity even as they gain terrible new forms of endurance. He knows they cannot survive this, not as themselves, not as the warriors they were. The choice before him is simple and impossible: surrender to the warp and become daemon spawn, or resist and be slowly transformed into something that serves neither chaos nor humanity. He chooses resistance, issues the order that dooms his chapter but perhaps saves their souls. All Marines to don their armor and never remove it, seal themselves inside ceramite shells. Let the armor become not protection but prison, containing whatever they are becoming, preventing complete dissolution into warp stuff. He leads by example, entering his artificer armor and ordering the tech priest to weld it shut, to remove any possibility of escape even as his body begins to burn with unnatural fire inside the sealed suit. The transformation accelerates. The firehawks are dying by degrees, but their deaths stretch across subjective eternities. Their flesh burns away inside their armor, consumed by warp fire that somehow does not destroy, that transforms rather than annihilates. They become flame, become hate. Become the absolute distilled essence of resistance against chaos. Everything else burned away until only purpose remains. They fight on. Have no choice but to fight on, because fighting is what they are now, all they are, the single defining characteristic around which their new existence organizes itself. The daemons begin to fear them. This should be impossible. Daemons do not know fear, are themselves the incarnation of terror. But the burning Marines have become something that hurts them in ways they do not understand. Weapons forged from absolute faith and absolute suffering into forms that can wound even immaterial entities. Time passes. Centuries perhaps, compressed into moments or stretched across eons. Inside the fleet, causality has become meaningless. The firehawks exist in all moments simultaneously, trapped in eternal present, where they have always been fighting, always been dying, always been transforming. They are space marines. They are ghosts. They are ideas of space marines given form through mechanisms that should not exist, sustained by will that refuses to accept extinction, and then, suddenly, impossibly, they are elsewhere. The fleet exits the warp, though none can explain how or why. They emerge in real space, their ships battered beyond recognition, their crews either dead or irrevocably changed. But they emerge. Return to the material universe from which they departed so long ago. How long? The chronometers are useless, showing readings from seconds to millennia. But when they check Imperial records, when they access astropathic communications and compare mission dates, they learn that 5 years have passed. 5 years since the Firehawks entered that cursed warp storm. 5 years since the Imperium declared them lost with all hands. They are too late for the Badab War, too late for everything they intended to do. But they are, in some terrible sense, still here, still capable of action, still bound by oaths of service that transcended even their transformation. They try to report their survival, try to request new orders, try to return to Imperial service in whatever capacity their changed nature allows. No response comes. Or perhaps responses come, but they can no longer perceive them, their senses transformed beyond compatibility with conventional communication. They linger in real space for weeks, broadcasting on every frequency, growing increasingly desperate for acknowledgement, for some sign that the Imperium recognizes their return. Nothing. Silence. The cold indifference of a galaxy that has already mourned them and moved on. This rejection completes their transformation. They were space marines who served the Imperium, who drew meaning from their place in humanity's great crusade for survival. That identity sustained them even through the horrors of warp imprisonment. But if the Imperium no longer recognizes them, no longer offers them purpose or direction, then what are they? What keeps them manifesting in real space instead of dissolving back into the immaterium from which they barely escaped? The answer emerges not through reason but through instinct, through whatever remains of their conditioning as defenders of humanity. They sense battles, conflicts where Imperial forces face extinction. The sensation pulls at them like gravity, like the Astronomican's light once pulled at navigator senses. They transition back into the warp easily now. Their nature changed enough that moving between real and unreal has become natural, and follow that pull to its source. They emerge at a battlefield where chaos cultists are slaughtering an outpost garrison. The Firehawks manifest and annihilate the heretics with prejudice so absolute that witnesses will later swear the burning warriors were laughing, though their flames made no sound. When the battle ends, they vanish again, drawn by another distant call, another moment of desperate need. This becomes their existence, their purpose, their curse and salvation intermingled beyond separation. They are the legion of the damned now, no longer bound to their chapter identity, no longer individuals with names and hopes and distinct personalities. They are burning angels that appear where faith and need intersect, fight with fury born from centuries of warp prison horror, and vanish back into whatever realm sustains them between manifestations. Brother Leonid, if any trace of the warrior he was remains within the burning spectre bearing his armor, no longer remembers Terran music or high Gothic prayers. He remembers only fighting, only the endless cycle of manifestation and combat and dissolution. This is not life, but neither is it death. It is something else entirely, something for which human language lacks adequate terms. The tragedy operates on 4 levels, each nested within the others like Russian dolls of suffering. On the surface, loyal space marines lost in the warp. Sad, certainly, but such losses are common enough in the Imperium. The second layer, they did not simply die, but were transformed through prolonged torture into beings that exist in constant agony. Third layer, their transformation was caused by the very faith and determination that made them loyal servants, meaning their virtue became their curse. Fourth and deepest layer, they continue to serve an Imperium that does not acknowledge them, saving an empire that has forgotten they exist, perpetuating loyalty that can never be rewarded or even recognized. This is the arithmetic that creates the Legion, not divine intervention, not random chance, but the inexorable mathematics of faith and suffering, of determination pushed past all breaking points, of warriors who loved their duty so much that even transformation into burning specters could not extinguish their need to serve. We should pity them, should honor their sacrifice, should acknowledge the terrible price they paid and continue paying. But the Imperium does none of these things honestly. Instead, it creates comfortable myths about blessed warriors returned from death, saints who serve the Emperor's will. These myths let us use the Legion without confronting what using them means, let us benefit from their suffering without acknowledging our complicity in perpetuating it, because we do perpetuate it. Every time we pray for their intervention, every time we celebrate their victories, every time we invoke their legend to inspire new soldiers, we feed the faith engine that sustains them. We keep them manifesting, keep them fighting, keep them trapped in this liminal existence between service and suffering. Would they choose this if choice remained possible? We cannot know. They do not speak, cannot speak perhaps. Their capacity for communication burned away, along with everything else that made them individuals rather than weapons. We use them and tell ourselves it is righteous, tell ourselves they serve willingly, that their intervention proves the Emperor's grace. But deep in the watches of the night, in moments of honesty we rarely allow ourselves, we must wonder if we are saviors being saved, or murderers perpetuating endless suffering of warriors too loyal to die, too transformed to truly live, too bound by oaths made before their transformation to simply stop manifesting and accept whatever rest might. Exist beyond this burning half-existence. The Legion damns us through our acceptance of them, damns us by revealing how easily we rationalize exploitation when survival demands it, damns us by demonstrating that faith itself can be a weapon more terrible than any blade, more destructive than any corruption, because faith transformed the Firehawks into burning specters and continues to sustain them in that state, feeding on the hope of those they save to perpetuate their suffering indefinitely. And still we pray for them, still we welcome their arrival, still we call them blessed and refuse to see the horror beneath the myth. Perhaps that makes us worse than the chaos forces they fight. The ruinous powers are honest about what they offer. The Legion of the Damned serves an imperium built on comfortable lies, on exploitation master's honor, on suffering reframed as glory. They deserve better. They deserve to die in that warp storm, quickly and cleanly, their gene seed recovered and their memories preserved. They deserved memorial services that meant something, recognition of their sacrifice, peace earned through faithful service. Instead, they got transformation into weapons that fight forever, answering calls they never agreed to answer, saving people who will never know their names, serving an empire that erased them from official records while simultaneously exploiting their manifestations. This is not honor. This is not glory. This is tragedy wearing salvation's mask, horror dressed in heroism's clothes. But the Imperium cannot afford to acknowledge this, cannot afford to question the Legion's nature too closely, or examine the implications of their existence too thoroughly. Because if we admitted what they truly are, what their manifestations truly cost, we might have to stop using them. And the Imperium cannot afford that. Cannot afford to reject any weapon, any advantage, any tool that offers even marginal improvement in survival odds against the endless horrors arrayed against humanity. So we maintain the lie, tell the stories, pray the prayers, welcome the burning angels, and never ask whether angels should burn, whether salvation should hurt, whether the price of victory might sometimes exceed the value of winning. The Legion manifests more frequently now. Something is changing, some equilibrium is shifting. They appear at battles not yet begun, arrive before distress calls are sent, manifest with increasing urgency, as if time itself is becoming unstable around them, as if the mechanism sustaining them is accelerating towards some critical threshold. Chapter 4 witnesses to the impossible. Those who have fought alongside the Legion carry scars that do not show on flesh. Psychological trauma of a peculiar variety, distinct from the standard combat stress that haunts soldiers across the Imperium. This is not the fear of death or the horror of violence witnessed. This is something stranger, more insidious. The slow-burning realization that reality operates according to rules more flexible and terrible than you had imagined. Sister Palatine Morgana of the Order of the Valorous Heart encountered the Legion at the Shrine of St. Celestine's Tears when a Black Legion warband attempted to desecrate the holy site. She was, by all accounts, a woman of unshakable faith. 3 decades of service, 17 major engagements, commendations for valor under fire. The kind of soldier the ecclesiarchy holds as exemplar of righteous devotion. Her faith was not theoretical or abstract. It was tested, proven, absolute, until she saw them. They were not right, she testified later to her canoness, in a private confession that was never meant to leave the Order's archives, but which leaked through channels that remain unclear. I have fought daemons. I have stood before possessed heretics whose bodies twisted into shapes that mock the human form. I have witnessed warp spawn that defy description. But those things are wrong in ways I understand. They are corruption, chaos, perversion of natural order. The Legion, she paused here, the transcript notes for nearly a full minute. The Legion felt wrong in the opposite direction, like they had been purified past the point where purification remains holy, refined beyond any material that should exist. They hurt to look at, not my eyes, my soul. This description repeats across witness testimonies with disturbing consistency. The Legion causes spiritual discomfort in those who perceive them. Not fear precisely, not revulsion in the normal sense, but a deep instinctive recognition that they violate categories that should not be violated, that they exist in a state that consciousness finds difficult to process without experiencing distress. Interrogator Callas of the Ordo Malleus conducted interviews with 173 individuals who had witnessed Legion manifestations at close range. His classified report, fragments of which surfaced through inquisitorial leaks, noted recurring psychological symptoms, nightmares featuring burning figures that do not move or speak, persistent sense of being observed by entities that exist just outside normal perception, difficulty distinguishing between memory and present experience, as if the moment of encountering the Legion had somehow become unstuck from normal temporal progression. Most disturbing were the cases of temporal confusion. 17 witnesses reported experiencing the Legion's manifestation multiple times, despite records confirming they had only witnessed a single event. They described variations in the battle's progression, alternate outcomes, subtle differences in the Legion's tactics, as if they had observed several versions of the same event unfolding, simultaneously or sequentially through multiple timelines. The Ordo Malleus classified this phenomenon as possible warp contamination and recommended the affected individuals undergo extensive purification rituals. 12 of the 17 died during these rituals. The remaining 5 were declared sufficiently cleansed and returned to duty, though all reported continued nightmares and temporal disorientation. Within 2 years, 4 had died in what official records classified as combat accidents, but which bore suspicious similarities to suicide. The 5th, Acadian sergeant named Vorten, disappeared entirely. His last known communication was a rambling Vox message sent to his commanding officer, transcribed as follows: "They're always burning, always have been, always will be. Time is a circle for them, sir. They fight the same battles over and over. We see them appear once, but they've appeared 1,000 times. Will appear 1,000 more. They're trapped. We all are." The circle closes. The fire never stops. I can see it now. Can see all the moments at once. They're here. Always here. How do we not see? The transmission ended. Vorten was never recovered. These cases suggest something profoundly disturbing about the Legion's relationship with time and causality. If witnesses are indeed perceiving temporal anomalies, multiple versions of events, circular time structures, simultaneous manifestations, then the Legion might not simply move through time in linear fashion like conventional beings. They might exist at multiple points simultaneously, their nature fundamentally atemporal, their manifestations representing intersection points where their eternal burning touches material reality. Consider the implications. If Brother Leonid exists in this atemporal state, then every battle he has ever fought and every battle he will ever fight exist for him as simultaneous present. He experiences the siege of Vilmarest and the defense of Koritani and 10,000 other engagements, not as sequence but as overlapping now, eternal moment of combat without beginning or end. This would explain the Legion's perfect coordination. They do not need to communicate because they are not truly separate entities operating in sequence, but rather aspects of a single phenomenon manifesting at multiple points. It would also represent torture beyond any conventional understanding. Imagine experiencing every wound you have ever received simultaneously. Every death, because surely they die in some battles, overwhelmed by impossible odds, occurring as eternal present rather than finite ending. Every moment of suffering compressed into infinite now, stretched across eternity without possibility of relief through temporal progression. This makes their silence comprehensible. What words could express such existence? What communication could bridge the gap between linear consciousness experience, unfolding moment by moment, and a temporal being where all moments coexist? They do not speak, not because they cannot, but because speech requires sequential thought, requires ordering experiences into before and after, requires existing in time rather than outside it. Tech adept Vralin of Mars encountered the Legion during the Forge, War of Drusus Tertiary, when chaos engines attempted to corrupt the planet's forge veins. As a senior member of the cult Mechanicus, Vralin approached the phenomenon with scientific detachment rather than religious awe. He deployed every scanning device at his disposal, attempting to gather empirical data about their nature and composition. His recordings show anomalies. Auspex readings fluctuate wildly in Legion proximity, registering life signs and absence of life signs simultaneously. Thermal imaging captures heat signatures that should not be possible. Temperatures exceeding plasma furnace outputs, concentrated in human-sized forms without dispersing into surrounding atmosphere. Electromagnetic sensors detect patterns that resemble neural activity but operate at frequencies no biological brain could generate. Most peculiar are the chronometric readings. Vralin deployed experimental time differential scanners designed to detect minute variations in local temporal flow, useful for identifying warp contamination or Xenos temporal weapons. Near the Legion, these scanners recorded massive fluctuations, time accelerating and decelerating randomly around individual warriors. Moments where local causality appeared to reverse, effects preceding causes by measurable fractions of seconds. They do not move through time, Vralin wrote in his report. They drag time with them. Or perhaps they exist partially outside standard temporal dimensions, creating distortions where they intersect with normal space-time. The mathematics are troubling. They suggest forms of existence that should not be stable, that violate fundamental principles of causality and thermodynamics. The Fabricator General recalled Vralin to Mars immediately upon receiving this report. Official reason, essential research requirements. Actual reason, according to sources within the Mechanicus, prevention of further investigation that might yield conclusions too heretical to permit. Vralin arrived on Mars and was assigned to deep core excavation projects, far from any potential Legion manifestation sites. He has not published further research on the subject. But his data persists, circulating through tech priest networks, analyzed by minds that value empirical truth over comfortable dogma. The consensus among those willing to risk censure, the Legion exists in what might be termed quantum superposition with respect to temporal states. They are simultaneously past, present, and future, dead and alive, material and immaterial, daemon and angel. This superposition makes them effective against chaos forces specifically because daemons are themselves atemporal entities, beings that exist outside conventional time through their nature as warp manifestations. When daemon fights normal space marine, the daemon possesses advantages derived from its non-linear existence. It can perceive possible futures, react to attacks that have not yet been made, exploit vulnerabilities before they manifest. But when daemon fights Legion member, both combatants exist in similar atemporal states. The playing field levels. The daemon's advantages disappear, confronted with opponents who are equally outside conventional causality. More than that, the Legion seems to cause daemons genuine pain, not physical damage, which is largely meaningless to immaterial entities, but some deeper harm, some injury to the fundamental structure of their being. Witnesses consistently report daemons fleeing from Legion forces even when numerical advantage suggests they should press the attack. Report daemon princes, entities of immense power that fear almost nothing, withdrawing from battlefields where the Legion manifests. What could make a daemon prince flee? What could frighten beings that are themselves incarnations of fear? The answer might lie in what the Legion represents. Absolute faith weaponized through absolute suffering, transformed into form that can harm entities normally invulnerable to material weapons. The daemons do not fear destruction. They cannot be truly destroyed, always reforming in the warp eventually. They fear something worse: erasure, negation. The Legion's flames seem to burn not just physical form but metaphysical essence, threatening to unmake daemons at levels deeper than mere banishment. If true, this makes the Legion the Imperium's most effective anti-chaos weapon. Nothing else in the Imperial arsenal, not Grey Knights with their psychic purity, not exorcists with their controlled possession, not even the most powerful saints, demonstrates equivalent capability to permanently harm demonic entities. The Legion does not banish, does not repel. It destroys in ways that violate everything we understand about the relationship between material and immaterial reality. But this capability comes with costs we are only beginning to comprehend. The Legion does not simply kill daemons, they absorb something from them. Witnesses report the flames burning brighter after daemon kills, as if the Legion gains strength from destroying warp entities. This could be simple energy absorption, taking power from defeated enemies, or it could be something darker. Something that suggests the Legion feeds on daemon essence, requires it to maintain their manifestation, hungers for it with need that transcends tactical consideration. Inquisitor Vex of the Ordo Malleus proposed a heretical theory before his disappearance. The Legion and daemons are mirror images, both a temporal entity sustained by belief and emotion, both existing partially in the warp, partially in real space, both requiring psychic energy to maintain coherence. The difference is sourcing. Daemons draw power from chaos worship and emotional excess, while the Legion draws from faith and martyrdom. But structurally, metaphysically, they might be more similar than different. This theory explains the Legion's effectiveness. They can harm daemons because they understand them at fundamental level, operate according to similar principles, fight using comparable mechanisms. A daemon attempting to corrupt a Legion member would be like cancer trying to infect a corpse. No living tissue remains to twist. The Legion has already been transformed past the point where chaos corruption functions. They are, in their own terrible way, immune. But Vex's theory also suggests something profoundly disturbing. If the Legion and daemons are mirror images, what separates them? What prevents the Legion from becoming simply another category of warp entity, another predator feeding on human psychic energy, another horror that wears humanity's face, while serving inhuman purposes? The answer might be nothing. Nothing except their own fading memories of what they were, their increasingly tenuous connection to the Imperium they once served, their continued belief, if belief remains possible for such beings, that they fight for humanity rather than merely feeding upon it. Every manifestation might weaken that belief. Every battle might erode whatever remains of their humanity. They are becoming something else, slowly, inexorably, through the simple act of existing in their transformed state. Each manifestation requires drawing power from the warp. Each daemon killed provides energy that sustains them. Each witness who sees them and spreads legends generates faith that feeds their continued existence. The feedback loop that sustains them might also be transforming them, gradually shifting them from loyal servants to something that serves only itself, only its need to continue existing, to continue burning. How long before the transformation completes? How many more battles before whatever remains of Brother Leonid disappears entirely, replaced by entity that wears his armor but contains none of his consciousness, none of his loyalty, none of the oaths that made him Space Marine rather than simple killer? We cannot know, cannot measure such progression. Can only watch and pray that degradation remains slow enough that the Legion continues serving humanity for whatever time remains before the final transition. Canoness Helene of the Order of Our Martyred Lady met Sister Palatine Morgana after the shrine incident, attempting to provide spiritual counseling for the psychological trauma. Morgana was not recovering. Her faith remained absolute, but her understanding had shifted. She could not reconcile what she witnessed with what she believed about the universe, about the Emperor's plan, about the relationship between divine will and human suffering. If the Legion are blessed, Morgana asked during one session, why do they burn? Fire is purifying, yes, but also agonizing. Are we to believe the Emperor blesses his servants with eternal pain? That salvation looks like bodies wreathed in flames, minds shattered by transformation, existence reduced to endless fighting without purpose or relief. She paused. Or if they are damned cursed by what they experienced in the warp, why do they fight for us? Why do they save us? Damnation should serve chaos, not oppose it. Unless, another pause, unless damnation and salvation are not opposites, unless they are the same thing viewed from different angles. Unless the Legion represents what happens when you push faith past breaking, when you refuse to die or surrender but also cannot survive. They exist in the space between, neither blessed nor cursed, both simultaneously. Helene reported this conversation to her superiors, expressing concern about possible heretical thinking. But she also admitted, in private notes discovered after her death during an unrelated campaign, that Morgana's words haunted her, that she could not dismiss them as simple trauma-induced confusion, that they pointed toward theological problems the ecclesiarchy had never adequately addressed. What is the relationship between suffering and sanctity? Imperial doctrine teaches that martyrdom is glorious, that dying for the Emperor represents the highest possible service. But the Legion did not die cleanly. They died slowly, agonizingly, across subjective eternities in the warp, and they did not stay dead. They continue existing in a state that appears to involve constant suffering, constant burning, constant exposure to torments that would break normal humans instantly. Is this blessed? If the Emperor has power to return warriors from death to serve again, why does he return them as burning specters rather than restored heroes? Why grant continued existence in form that causes spiritual discomfort to those who witness it, that operates through mechanisms suspiciously similar to demonic manifestation, that requires questionable sourcing of power to maintain stability? The alternative is that the Emperor does not control the Legion, that they exist through their own desperate choice, through determination pushed past all reasonable limits, through refusal to accept extinction even after death should have claimed them. This makes their suffering more tragic. They torture themselves, perpetuate their own damnation through loyalty too absolute to die. But it also makes them comprehensible. They are not divine mystery, they are cautionary tale. Evidence of what happens when warriors cannot accept ending, when oaths outlive the oath makers, when service becomes pathology rather than virtue. This interpretation strips away the comfort of divine plan, admits that sometimes suffering serves no higher purpose, sometimes transformation breaks people beyond repair. Sometimes loyalty itself is poison, sustaining beings past the point where continued existence serves anyone's interest. The Legion fights on not because the Emperor wills it, not because humanity needs them, but because they cannot stop. Because stopping would require confronting what they have become, accepting losses too terrible to acknowledge, dying deaths they have already delayed for centuries. They are addicts, addicted to service, to purpose, to the only meaning their transformed consciousness can still process. And the Imperium enables this addiction, celebrates it, weaves it into theology that sanctifies their suffering rather than recognizing it as tragedy that should have ended long ago. Morgana understood this, saw through the comfortable myths to the horror beneath. It shattered something essential in her faith. Not belief in the Emperor, but belief in the Imperium's honesty, in the ecclesiarchy's wisdom, in the righteousness of institutional structures she had served her entire adult life. She continued her duties, continued fighting the Emperor's wars, but something had changed. Witnesses reported she fought with new fury, new desperation, as if trying to die in battle, seeking clean ending before time and suffering could transform her into something like the Legion. She succeeded. Fell during an assault on a Death Guard plague ship, body consumed by Nurgle's rot before her battle sisters could recover it. Her squadmates reported that she smiled as she died, as if death itself was victory, as if she had won something precious by avoiding the Legion's fate. Perhaps she had. The Legion continues manifesting, continues fighting, continues existing in state between service and suffering, between salvation and damnation, between being and unbeing. We witness them and try to categorize them to fit them into theological frameworks or scientific models or military doctrines. All these attempts fail because the Legion exists specifically in spaces where categories break down, where conventional understanding becomes inadequate, where truth is too complex and terrible for comfortable classification. They are what remains when everything else burns away. The irreducible core of service stripped of meaning, loyalty exceeding purpose, determination persisting past all reasonable termination points. They fight because they fought and will fight, temporal loop of violence connecting past and future through eternal present of combat. We call them blessed because calling them cursed would require admitting that curses and blessings might be indistinguishable at sufficient extremes, and they come more frequently, more urgently. As if time itself is collapsing around them, as if the mechanism sustaining their existence is reaching critical state, as if something is building toward resolution that we can sense but not comprehend. The witnesses report the flames burning brighter, the temporal distortions increasing, the sense that each manifestation brings them closer to some threshold beyond which their nature will fundamentally change. What lies beyond that threshold? What happens when whatever remains of the Firehawks finally completes its transformation, when the last traces of humanity burn away entirely, when they become fully what they have been slowly? Becoming for centuries, will they remain loyal, or will they emerge as something new, something that serves neither Chaos nor Imperium, but only its own incomprehensible purposes? We will discover the answer, sooner than we might prefer. The Legion's accelerating manifestations suggest terminus approaching, endpoint to transformation that began in Warpstorm centuries ago. They are becoming. And when they finish becoming, when the last barriers between what they were and what they are dissolving completely, then we will learn whether the Imperium has been nurturing saviors or monsters, angels or nightmares, final defenders or ultimate betrayers. Until then, we use them, accept their intervention, tell ourselves comfortable lies about blessed warriors and divine will, and pray though to whom or what remains unclear, that when the truth finally emerges, it proves more merciful than our worst suspicions suggest. Chapter 5. Heresies of Faith. The Ecclesiarchy maintains official position. The Legion are imperial saints, blessed warriors, proof of the god. Emperor's continued intervention in human affairs. This position is taught in seminaries, preached from pulpits, inscribed in prayer books distributed across the Imperium. It has the weight of institutional authority, the comfort of certainty, the appeal of aligning observed phenomena with desired doctrine. It is also, by any honest assessment, completely inadequate to explain what the Legion actually demonstrates. Cardinal Voskov of the Synod Ministra spent 2 decades compiling evidence about Legion manifestations, not propaganda. Not sanitized reports designed to support predetermined conclusions. Actual evidence, witness testimonies, Auspex recordings, timeline analysis, behavioral patterns, theological implications. His private archive contained 3,000 pages of documentation suggesting that official ecclesiarchy position was, at minimum, incomplete and at maximum, deliberately misleading. He planned to present his findings at the Synod's annual convocation. Prepared a presentation arguing that the Imperium required new theological frameworks to comprehend the Legion, that clinging to comfortable saints classification prevented deeper understanding, that honest faith demanded confronting mysteries rather than papering over them with inadequate doctrine. He died 3 days before the convocation, choked on food during private dinner. Official investigation concluded accidental death, no evidence of foul play. Simply tragic coincidence that Cardinal with controversial theories about the Imperium's most mysterious warriors happened to die immediately before presenting findings that would embarrass the Ecclesiarchy and challenge foundational doctrines. No one believes this was coincidence. Everyone pretends to believe it anyway. This is how the Imperium functions, through collective agreement to maintain fictions that serve institutional stability, even when everyone privately acknowledges they are fictions. Voskov's archive disappeared, seized by the Inquisition officially, but sources within the Ordo Hereticus report that they found only empty shells when they arrived. Someone else had reached Voskov's quarters first, someone with authority and motivation to ensure his research never reached public discourse. That research exists somewhere, hidden in private collections or institutional archives, too dangerous to destroy but too controversial to acknowledge. Fragments surface occasionally, leaked documents, encrypted files distributed through dissident networks, excerpts appearing in heretical text that most will never see. From these fragments, we can reconstruct outlines of Voskov's argument, understand the heresies he was willing to voice, comprehend why the Ecclesiarchy needed his silence. His central thesis, the Legion of the Damned, represents an unprecedented form of existence that challenges the fundamental binary between salvation and damnation, between Emperor's blessing and chaos corruption. They are neither and both. They exist in liminal space that imperial theology insists should not exist, cannot exist, must not be acknowledged even if it does exist. Traditional doctrine teaches clear boundaries. You serve the Emperor and receive blessing. You serve chaos and receive damnation. You live righteous life and ascend to Emperor's side upon death. You fall to heresy and suffer eternal torment. These categories are absolute, mutually exclusive, clearly defined. They provide certainty in a universe that offers precious little certainty otherwise. The Legion violates these categories. They appear to serve the Emperor, but manifest through mechanisms similar to demonic possession. They save imperial lives, but operate with coldness that suggests compromised humanity. They fight chaos with fury suggesting blessed purpose, but burn with flames that hurt to witness, that cause spiritual distress, that operate through principles more similar to warp entities than holy warriors. Voskov argued that acknowledging the Legion's true nature required admitting that imperial theology had oversimplified reality, that the relationship between material and immaterial, between faith and corruption, between human and daemon, was more complex than comfortable doctrine suggested. That beings could exist in states that combined elements of blessing and curse, that served the Emperor while simultaneously being transformed by forces traditionally associated with damnation. This argument is heresy. Not because it is necessarily false, but because it is dangerous. Imperial faith requires certainty. Requires clear boundaries between right and wrong, holy and profane, human and monstrous. Citizens facing galaxy of horrors need to believe that loyalty to Emperor guarantees protection, that service ensures salvation, that the universe operates according to comprehensible moral logic. Admitting that beings might serve the Emperor while existing in states similar to daemonic possession, that faith itself might transform loyal warriors into entities that operate according to warp mechanics, that salvation might be indistinguishable from damnation when examined closely enough. This admission would destabilize foundations of Imperial belief. Would raise questions about whether the Emperor truly protects those who serve him, whether martyrdom leads to blessed ascension or tormented half-existence, whether the Imperium's rhetoric about glorious sacrifice masks suffering too terrible to acknowledge. The ecclesiarchy cannot permit these questions, not because it has good answers, but because it has no answers. Because honest examination of the Legion's nature reveals contradictions that doctrine cannot resolve, mysteries that theology cannot explain, horrors that faith alone cannot make righteous. So it maintains fictions, calls them saints and ignores evidence, celebrates their victories and suppresses analysis. Ensures that figures like Cardinal Voskov die conveniently before sharing research that might trouble comfortable narratives. But suppression does not eliminate truth. It simply drives truth underground, into whispered conversations and classified reports, into spaces where those willing to risk censure discuss possibilities official channels will not acknowledge. The Ordo Malleus knows more than it admits. Inquisitors who specialize in daemonic threats cannot avoid noticing similarities between the Legion and entities they hunt. They see the warp-touched manifestation patterns, the atemporal existence, the psychic resonances that read similar to possession or corruption. They note that the Legion's effectiveness against daemons might indicate not holy purity, but rather fundamental similarity, one warp entity understanding how to harm another. Most Inquisitors keep these observations private, share them only with trusted colleagues. Understand that voicing such theories publicly would invite charges of heresy, censure from the ecclesiarchy, possible execution for spreading dangerous ideas. But they think them, cannot help thinking them, because evidence compels conclusions that doctrine forbids. Inquisitor Lord Gaval submitted classified report to the Ordo Malleus Conclave, arguing for comprehensive study of the Legion using techniques developed for analyzing daemon manifestations, not because he believed them daemonic, but because daemonic analysis provided closest comparable framework for understanding their nature. He proposed controlled experiments, attempting to communicate with Legion members using psychic techniques, analyzing residues left by their manifestations, tracking the faith patterns that seemed to predict their appearances. His proposal was denied. Officially, insufficient resources for research of uncertain value. Actually, terror that investigation might reveal truths the Imperium prefers to ignore. Better to maintain useful ignorance than risk discovering the Legion represents something that invalidates crucial doctrinal assumptions. Gaval accepted the denial, publicly. Privately, he continued his research, compiling data without official sanction, building theories he shared only with select colleagues. His work suggested the Legion existed in what he termed parasympathetic relationship with the Imperium, parallel to it, mirroring its structures and purposes, but not actually subordinate to Imperial command or Emperor's will. They fight for humanity, Gaval argued, but not because humanity commands them. They appear at desperate battles not because the Imperium requests intervention, but because their nature draws them to such conflicts, like sharks drawn to blood or moths to flame. The correlation between Imperial need and Legion manifestation is not causation flowing from command structure. It is synchronization, two entities pursuing aligned purposes through independent mechanisms. This distinction matters tremendously. If the Legion serves Imperial command structure, then it operates as tool that can be directed, weapon that can be targeted, resource that can be allocated. The Imperium maintains control, determines deployment, bears responsibility for their actions. But if the Legion operates independently, making own targeting decisions, pursuing own purposes that merely happen to align with Imperial interests, then control is illusion. The Imperium benefits from their intervention without directing it, receives assistance without earning it, celebrates warriors who fight for humanity without necessarily fighting for the Imperium that claims to represent humanity. This creates uncomfortable theological position. The ecclesiarchy teaches that the God Emperor directs all things, that imperial institutions serve as his will made manifest, that loyalty to Imperium equals loyalty to Emperor without distinction. But if the Legion serves the Emperor while ignoring imperial institutions, manifesting without orders, fighting without coordination, vanishing without acknowledgement, then perhaps Emperor and Imperium are not identical. Perhaps it is possible to serve one while rejecting the other. This possibility terrifies the ecclesiarchy more than any daemonic threat. The ecclesiarchy's authority derives from claim to represent Emperor's will, to interpret his desires, to channel his blessing through institutional structures. If beings can connect to Emperor directly, can serve him without institutional mediation, then ecclesiarchy becomes unnecessary. Its power evaporates, its pronouncements lose authority. The entire edifice of religious control that helps maintain imperial unity collapses. The Legion, by their very existence, suggests this possibility. They wear Astartes' armor-bearing chapter heraldry. They fight using space marine tactics. But they do not report to chapter masters or respond to imperial commanders. They manifest according to logic that transcends institutional hierarchy, operating through connections to something, whether Emperor's will or their own transformed nature or the collective faith of humanity that exists outside official channels. This makes them profoundly dangerous, not to Imperium's enemies, but to Imperium's internal stability. They are proof that institutional structures claiming to represent divine will might be unnecessary intermediaries, that loyalty can flow through channels the Imperium does not control, that service to Emperor need not involve submission to ecclesiarchal authority. No wonder the ecclesiarchy works so hard to control the Legion's narrative. To classify them as saints operating within understood frameworks rather than mysteries that challenge foundational assumptions. To ensure that their manifestations are interpreted as proof of divine favor for imperial institutions, rather than evidence that direct connection to Emperor's will remains possible outside institutional mediation. But this narrative control is breaking down. Too many witnesses, too much evidence, too many people who have seen the Legion and recognize that official explanations do not account for observed phenomena. The comfortable lies are wearing thin, eroded by accumulated contradictions between what doctrine claims and what reality demonstrates. Sister Dialogus Septima of the Adepta Sororitas specializes in linguistic analysis and theological interpretation. She conducted unauthorized study of witness testimonies from Legion encounters, analyzing language patterns, identifying recurring themes, mapping conceptual frameworks people used when attempting to describe their experiences. Her findings, circulated through encrypted channels that the ecclesiarchy has not yet traced, reveal troubling patterns. Witnesses consistently struggle to describe the Legion in language compatible with imperial doctrine. They reach for metaphors drawn from contradictory sources: angels and daemons, blessed and cursed, holy and profane. They use paradoxical formulations that should be grammatical errors, but represent genuine attempts to convey experiences that transcend binary categories. They report feeling simultaneously saved and endangered, grateful and terrified, witnessing miracles and abominations without distinguishing which is which. This linguistic breakdown, Septima argues, reflects genuine ontological confusion. The witnesses are not poorly educated or theologically unsophisticated. They are attempting to describe something that does not fit into available conceptual categories, reality that refuses to conform to doctrinal frameworks. Their confusion is appropriate response to inappropriate phenomenon. Beings that should not exist according to imperial theology but manifestly do exist, forcing observers to acknowledge inadequacy of their conceptual tools. Language shapes thought. When language breaks down, when available words cannot capture experienced reality, thought itself becomes unstable. People who encounter the Legion often report lasting psychological effects, not because they witnessed something traumatic, but because they witnessed something incomprehensible, something that violated their understanding of what kinds of beings can exist and what categories reality permits. This incomprehensibility is Legion's true weapon against faith. Not faith in Emperor, most witnesses report strengthened conviction that Emperor protects humanity after witnessing Legion intervention. But faith in Imperium, in ecclesiarchy, in institutional structures that claim authority to interpret divine will. How can these institutions be trusted when they cannot explain the Legion? When their official positions so obviously fail to account for observed evidence? When they suppress research and silence questioners rather than addressing mysteries honestly? The cracks spread, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, inexorably, through populations that have encountered the Legion or heard testimonies from those who have. People begin asking questions, wondering whether other official doctrines might be equally inadequate. Recognizing that institutional authority derives from claimed expertise about divine will, and that expertise appears compromised when confronted with phenomena it cannot explain. This is how heresies begin. Not through dramatic rejection of faith, but through accumulated doubt about whether institutions claiming to represent faith actually possess the wisdom and knowledge they claim. The Legion, by existing in ways that imperial theology cannot accommodate, becomes seed of institutional doubt, evidence that official pronouncements might be self-serving fictions rather than divine truth. The ecclesiarchy responds with predictable methods: suppression of dangerous research, punishment of those who voice uncomfortable questions, propaganda reinforcing official narratives, classification of contradictory evidence. These methods have maintained institutional control for millennia. They are proven effective at managing populations and limiting the spread of destabilizing ideas. But they cannot eliminate truth, cannot make the Legion fit into categories that clearly do not contain them, cannot erase the fact that millions of imperial citizens have now witnessed beings whose existence challenges foundational theological claims. The ecclesiarchy can control the narrative around the Legion. It cannot control the Legion itself, and the Legion manifests more frequently, more publicly, more obviously in ways that contradict comfortable explanations. Each appearance adds evidence that official doctrine is inadequate. Each battle demonstrates capabilities that should not exist according to theological frameworks. Each manifestation forces more people to choose between believing institutional pronouncements and believing their own experiences. This choice is the crisis building throughout the Imperium. Not military crisis. The Imperium faces endless military threats and has systems for managing them, but theological crisis, challenge to the conceptual foundations that hold imperial culture together. The Legion represents living proof that reality is stranger than doctrine admits, that the universe operates according to rules more complex than simplified binaries between good and evil, that faith itself might transform loyal servants in ways that institutional theology cannot categorize as simply blessed or cursed. Abbot Tertian of the Schola Progenium attempted to develop new educational frameworks for teaching about the Legion to young imperial citizens. He recognized that traditional saints' narrative was failing, that students exposed to actual evidence about Legion manifestations were experiencing cognitive dissonance between doctrine and reality. His proposed solution: teach the Legion as mystery rather than certainty, as phenomenon requiring humility about human understanding rather than confidence in institutional explanations. "We must admit ignorance," he wrote in proposal to the Schola Progenium's governing council. Must teach our students that faith does not require claiming to understand all mysteries, that loyalty to Emperor does not depend on accepting inadequate explanations for complex phenomena. The Legion exists. They fight for humanity. Beyond these facts, we must acknowledge uncertainty. Better to admit we do not fully comprehend them than to insist on explanations that students can recognize as incomplete or false. The proposal was rejected within hours. Tertian was removed from his teaching position and reassigned to administrative duties where he had no contact with students. Official reason: concerns about pedagogical methods. Actual reason: refusal to accept that admitting institutional ignorance about the Legion might lead students to question institutional authority about everything else. The Imperium cannot afford such questioning, cannot permit citizens to recognize that authorities claiming absolute knowledge might actually possess only partial understanding, embellished with self-serving propaganda. The entire structure of imperial control depends on populations accepting institutional pronouncements without excessive skepticism, trusting that the ecclesiarchy and administratum and other governing bodies possess wisdom and knowledge that justifies their authority, admitting error about the Legion, admitting that official doctrine is inadequate, that institutional understanding is incomplete, that even the ecclesiarchy must acknowledge mysteries it cannot explain, would set precedent that could destabilize other doctrinal positions. If the ecclesiarchy is wrong about the Legion, what else might it be wrong about? If institutional explanations for one phenomenon prove inadequate, why trust institutional explanations for other phenomena? These questions threaten everything. Not immediately, not dramatically, but through slow erosion of institutional authority, gradual recognition that the Imperium's governing bodies maintain power through claimed expertise that closer examination reveals as incomplete at best and dishonest at worst, so the ecclesiarchy cannot admit error, cannot acknowledge mystery, cannot teach humility about the limits of human understanding, must instead insist on confident explanations even when those explanations obviously fail to account for evidence, must maintain fictions that serve institutional interests regardless of whether they serve truth. And the Legion burns, manifests, fights, saves lives and destabilizes doctrines simultaneously, existing as both weapon against Imperium's enemies and threat to Imperium's internal cohesion. They are what we need and what we fear. Salvation and crisis, proof of divine power and proof of institutional inadequacy. The paradox cannot be resolved, can only be managed through careful narrative control and ruthless suppression of uncomfortable questions. But management is not resolution. The tension builds, the contradictions accumulate. The theological crisis deepens with each new manifestation, each new witness, each new piece of evidence that official explanations cannot accommodate. Something must give. Some equilibrium must shift. The Legion's accelerating manifestations suggest approaching threshold, point where quantity of evidence transforms into qualitative change in understanding, where accumulated contradictions finally overwhelm institutional narratives and force honest reckoning with what these burning warriors actually represent. When that moment comes, and it will come, the patterns suggest inevitability. The Imperium will face choice. Admit that its theological frameworks are inadequate, that its doctrines are oversimplified, that reality is stranger and more terrible than comfortable teachings suggest. Or double down on fictions, suppress truth more aggressively, maintain comfortable lies through increasingly obvious applications of force and censorship. Either path leads to transformation, either path changes fundamental nature of imperial faith. The Legion, by existing in ways that doctrine cannot explain, is forcing the Imperium toward crisis that will redefine relationship between institutions and populations, between authority and truth, between faith and understanding. They are burning more than chaos cultists. They are burning the foundations of imperial certainty itself, revealing through their impossible existence that the universe refuses to conform to human categories, that some truths are too complex for comfortable doctrine, that faith sometimes requires admitting ignorance rather than claiming false knowledge. And in the burning, something new is emerging. Some understanding not yet fully formed. Some recognition that the Legion's mystery might be more valuable than any explanation could ever be. That maintaining space for genuine wonder and uncertainty might strengthen faith more than confident pronouncements about phenomena we do not truly understand. But whether the Imperium possesses wisdom to embrace this possibility, or whether it will crush such thinking to preserve institutional authority at any cost, that question remains unanswered. For now. Chapter 6. The Fire That Illuminates Nothing. Faith in imperial doctrine is supposed to be light. The Emperor's light. The Astronomicon burning across the galaxy. Candles lit in shrines. Illumination that drives back darkness, that reveals truth, that shows the righteous path forward through hostile universe. The Legion burns, but their fire illuminates nothing. This is not metaphor. This is observed phenomenon documented by hundreds of witnesses across dozens of engagements. The flames wreathing Legion warriors produce light, tremendous quantities of light, bright enough to be visible from kilometers away, intense enough to leave after images burned into retinas. But this light does not behave as light should. It casts no shadows. It does not reflect off surfaces in predictable ways. Objects illuminated by Legion flames appear simultaneously lit and unlit, visible and obscured, as if the light exists in superposition with darkness. Magos biologist Xanthus studied this phenomenon after the Battle of Meridian Apex, where Legion intervention had saved his research facility from chaos cultist attack. He deployed spectroscopic analysis equipment, attempting to determine the wavelength and composition of the flames. His instruments recorded paradoxes. Electromagnetic radiation at frequencies that should not produce visible light. Thermal signatures that suggested temperatures both impossibly high and measurably cold. Quantum states that violated fundamental principles of physics as understood by even the most advanced mechanicus theoreticians. The flames are not fire, Xanthus concluded in his report. Not in any conventional sense. They resemble fire, flicker and burn and consume, but operate according to principles that transcend material combustion. I believe they represent direct manifestation of psychic energy, given quasi-physical form through mechanisms I lack the theoretical framework to explain. They burn, but what they burn is not material fuel. They consume, possibility perhaps, probability, the space between states. They are the fire that burns away certainty itself. This conclusion earned him immediate censure from the Fabricator General, who declared such theorizing dangerously close to tech heresy. Xanthes was reassigned to routine maintenance duties on a remote Forge world, his research suppressed, his conclusions deemed too theologically problematic to permit continued investigation. But he had identified something crucial. The Legion's flames do not illuminate reality. They obscure it, complicate it, force observers to recognize that reality itself is less solid and comprehensible than comfortable materialism suggests. They burn at the intersection of material and immaterial, consuming the boundaries between states, existing as permanent reminder that the universe refuses to conform to human categories. This has implications that extend far beyond military effectiveness. If the Legion represents stable manifestation of psychic energy in material reality entities that are simultaneously warp stuff and physical matter, then they demonstrate possibilities that Imperial understanding of the warp explicitly denies. The Mechanicus teaches that warp and materium are separate realms, that entities belong to one or the other, that crossing between requires specific mechanisms like Geller fields or possession. The Legion exists as walking violation of this separation, beings that maintain coherent form while inhabiting both realms simultaneously. What does this mean for the fundamental nature of reality? If the boundary between warp and materium can be transcended, if beings can exist stably in both states at once, then perhaps the entire conceptual framework, distinguishing material from immaterial, is itself inadequate. Perhaps reality is not divided into separate realms, but rather represents single continuum with different regions having different properties. Perhaps the warp is not separate dimension, but rather underlying substrate of reality itself, normally invisible but always present, and material reality is simply localized region where this substrate has. Condensed into stable patterns we perceive as matter and energy. This interpretation would revolutionize Imperial understanding of physics, theology, and metaphysics, would suggest that daemons are not invaders from alien dimension, but rather naturally occurring patterns in the same substrate that produces material reality. Would imply that the Emperor's power derives not from divine transcendence, but from mastery of fundamental reality, substrate manipulation. Would indicate that the boundary between human and daemon, between flesh and spirit, between mortal and immortal, is permeable membrane rather than absolute wall. The Mechanicus cannot accept this. Their entire theology depends on clear distinction between machine spirit and warp entity, between blessed technology and corrupted Xenos science, between predictable material mechanisms and chaotic immaterial forces. Admitting that reality is unified continuum rather than divided realms would undermine the conceptual foundations justifying their practices and beliefs. The ecclesiarchy cannot accept this either. Their doctrine requires clear separation between Emperor's divine realm and Chaos's profane dimension, between blessed existence and damned corruption, between faithful service leading to heavenly ascension and heresy leading to infernal torment. Suggesting that all these states exist on single continuum rather than representing absolute alternatives would collapse the moral binaries that make Imperial faith psychologically and socially functional, so both institutions suppress investigation, classify research, censor conclusions, ensure that no one pursues the implications of the Legion's existence far enough to articulate theories that would destabilize foundational doctrines. Better to maintain useful ignorance than risk discovering truths that would require painful reassessment of everything the Imperium believes about the nature of existence. But the Legion continues manifesting, continues existing in ways that demonstrate these suppressed possibilities. Each appearance is data point suggesting that reality is stranger than doctrine admits. Each battle is experiment proving that beings can exist in states that official theology insists should be impossible. They are walking refutations of comfortable certainties, living proof that the universe operates according to rules more complex and terrible than simplified frameworks can accommodate. Inquisitor Covenant of the Ordo Hereticus encountered the Legion during the Purge of Hollow Spire, when Gene Stealer cult had infected an entire hive city's upper levels. He watched them fight with analytical detachment honed by decades of service, observing not just their combat effectiveness, but the metaphysical implications of their manifestation. His private journal, discovered after his death and immediately classified, contains observations that explain why he never published his findings. "They should not be," he wrote. "By every principle of theology and physics I have been taught, beings cannot exist as they exist. Matter and energy cannot behave as they behave. Causality cannot function as it functions in their presence. Yet they manifestly do exist, manifestly do behave in these impossible ways, manifestly do violate every rule I have learned." This forces uncomfortable conclusion. Either they are impossible entities that somehow exist anyway, or our understanding of what is possible is catastrophically incomplete. Covenant spent years attempting to determine which conclusion was correct. He studied demonic manifestation, analyzed saint phenomena, consulted with the most learned tech priests and theologians he could access through his inquisitorial authority. None could provide satisfactory explanation for the Legion that did not require abandoning fundamental principles of their respective disciplines. "I have concluded," his final journal entry states, dated 3 days before his death in what records classify as training accident, that the Legion represents what happens when faith itself becomes force comparable to physical laws. Not faith as metaphor or psychological state, but faith as literal energy that can reshape matter, transcend causality, maintain stable impossibilities through sheer collective conviction. Billions believe the Emperor protects. That belief generates psychic energy. Most of this energy dissipates harmlessly or feeds the Emperor's continued quasi-existence. But occasionally, when circumstances align, when warriors die with absolute faith in midst of warpstorm, that faith energy can crystallize, can transform dying flesh into something that exists because people believe it exists, that manifests because need and conviction align to make manifestation possible. This theory suggests the Legion is literally sustained by belief. Not metaphorically inspired or encouraged by faith, but actually constructed from it. They are what happens when the Imperium's rhetoric about faith moving mountains becomes literally true. When collective conviction that the Emperor protects becomes psychic force, sufficient to maintain warrior patterns beyond biological death, transforming consciousness and will into semi-stable warp constructs that can manifest in material reality. If true, this makes the Legion simultaneously proof of faith's power and evidence of its horror. Yes, belief can achieve the impossible, can sustain warriors beyond death, can create entities that bridge material and immaterial realms, can manifest salvation when conventional hope has died. But the cost is transformation that strips away everything except service, that reduces complex human beings to simple warrior patterns, that perpetuates existence in state that appears to involve constant suffering without possibility of release. The Legion are weapons forged from faith. But weapons do not benefit from their own effectiveness. The gun does not celebrate its accuracy. The sword does not feel satisfaction in cutting cleanly. The Legion manifests and fights and saves Imperial lives, but whatever remains of their consciousness experiences only continued burning, only endless combat, only manifestation after. Manifestation without rest or peace or any reward except continued existence in state that should not be. This is what faith costs at extremes. Not metaphorical sacrifice or difficult choices, but literal transformation of devoted servants into things that exist because existence itself has become their curse, because faith will not let them die. Even after death should have granted release. The Imperium celebrates this, holds it as proof of divine favor, never acknowledges that such favor might be indistinguishable from divine abandonment, that being sustained beyond death might represent not blessing but failure to be allowed the mercy of ending. Lex Mechanic Valtos of the Administratum attempted to calculate the psychic energy requirements for maintaining the Legion's manifestations, using estimates of their appearance frequency, duration, combat effectiveness, and the psychic resonance patterns recorded by astropathic stations near manifestation sites. He constructed a mathematical model of their energy economy. His findings were disturbing. The Legion requires enormous quantities of psychic energy to maintain coherence, more than individual faith could provide, more than even a devoted cult's worship could generate. The only plausible source is collective unconscious belief of billions, the diffuse faith of countless Imperial citizens who have heard Legion legends, who pray for salvation in desperate moments, who contribute tiny fractions of psychic energy that accumulate into tremendous reservoir. But this reservoir is not infinite. Valtos's calculations suggested the Legion's accelerating manifestation frequency is depleting available energy faster than faith regenerates it. They are manifesting more often because they must. The mechanism sustaining them requires regular manifestation to remain stable, like fire that must consume fuel or extinguish. Each appearance strengthens their legend, generates more faith, replenishes the energy reservoir. But each appearance also requires more energy than the previous, like addiction requiring increasing doses to achieve equivalent effect. This creates unsustainable trajectory. The Legion manifests more frequently, which generates more faith, which allows more manifestations, which requires more energy, which depletes the reservoir faster, which necessitates even more frequent manifestations to maintain stability. The feedback loop is accelerating toward inevitable conclusion. The moment when faith reservoir depletes faster than manifestations can replenish it, when the Legion requires more energy than the Imperium's collective belief can provide. What happens then? Do they simply cease manifesting, fading back into the warp permanently? Do they destabilize catastrophically, their impossible existence finally collapsing into incoherence? Or do they transform again, becoming something different, something that requires different energy sources, something that might not serve humanity as they currently do? Valtos submitted his calculations to the Administratum with recommendation for urgent study and contingency planning. His report was pacified and he was reassigned to census duties in remote agri-worlds, far from any potential Legion manifestation. The Imperium does not want to acknowledge that its spectral saviors operate on an unsustainable model, that their existence might be temporary, that the accelerating manifestations might represent not increasing power, but approaching failure. Because if the Legion represents what fate can achieve at extremes, their potential dissolution represents fate's ultimate failure. Would demonstrate that even absolute conviction, even transformation of loyal warriors into impossible entities, even the most extreme sacrifices and most desperate measures cannot provide permanent salvation. That everything the Imperium builds, even miracles, even beings that transcend death itself, is temporary, unstable, doomed to eventual collapse under its own impossible requirements. This is truth the Imperium cannot face, cannot admit, must suppress and deny and prevent anyone from articulating clearly enough that populations might recognize its implications. Because once people understand that even the Legion cannot last forever, cannot sustain their impossible existence indefinitely, then what hope remains? If beings literally constructed from faith itself are failing, what chance do normal humans have? What purpose does faith serve if its ultimate expressions still lead to failure and dissolution? The fire that illuminates nothing, the salvation that reveals only deeper horror, the proof of faith's power that simultaneously demonstrates faith's insufficiency. The Legion embodies all these contradictions, burning at the center of the Imperium's most fundamental tensions between what it believes and what reality demonstrates, and they manifest faster now, more urgently. The flames burn brighter with each appearance, as if consuming themselves, as if the mechanism sustaining them is feeding on its own structure in desperate attempt to maintain coherence through sheer intensity. Witnesses report the temporal distortions worsening, seeing Legion members flicker between moments, existing simultaneously in multiple points of same battle, fighting with themselves in superpositions that hurt to perceive. Something is failing, some equilibrium is collapsing. The Legion is approaching threshold beyond which their current form cannot persist. Whether they will dissolve completely or transform into something new, whether they will fade quietly or catastrophically destabilize, whether humanity will lose its spectral defenders or gain something worse, these questions have no answers, only trajectories, only mathematical inevitabilities that Lex Mechanic Valtos identified before his exile. The Imperium races toward moment of truth it refuses to acknowledge. The Legion burns toward conclusion it may not survive. And faith itself, faith that created them, that sustains them, that has made them both weapon and warning, faces test it may fail, forced to confront whether belief alone can sustain impossibilities forever, or whether even the most absolute conviction must eventually yield to entropy and collapse. The fire burns. But for how much longer? And when it finally exhausts whatever fuel sustains it, what darkness will rush in to fill the space where light that illuminated nothing briefly existed? No one knows. No one will investigate honestly. No one dares face the implications until crisis forces recognition. So the Imperium simply watches, simply uses them while they last, simply pretends that acceleration is not approaching asymptote, that brightness is not becoming desperation, that the Legion's increasing frequency represents strength rather than weakness. And the warriors themselves, whatever remains of the Firehawks within those burning forms, continue manifesting, continue fighting, continue existing in state between service and suffering, between miracle and horror, between being humanity's greatest defenders and humanity's most terrible mistake. They are what faith creates at extremes. What devotion becomes when pushed past all reasonable limits, what remains when everything else burns away. They are the fire that illuminates nothing, and they are running out of fuel. Chapter 7. The Names We Cannot Speak. Brother Sergeant Amadeus of the Firehawk 6th Company was, according to service records, an exceptional tactician. Not brilliant. The Astartes produce enough tactical geniuses, their simple excellence does not merit particular note, but solid, reliable. The kind of warrior commanders assigned to critical positions, knowing he would neither innovate brilliantly nor fail catastrophically. He would execute doctrine, adapt to circumstances, achieve objectives through competent application of training and experience. He had served for 237 years when the Firehawks entered that warp storm, had earned commendations in 17 major engagements, had trained 43 neophytes who went on to become full battle brothers, had maintained equipment with meticulous care, participated in chapter rituals with appropriate devotion, embodied the Firehawks' values without particularly transcending them. He was, in other words, unremarkable in ways that made him valuable, exceptional in his normalcy. The foundation on which chapters build their effectiveness. Not the heroes whose names echo through history, but the competent majority whose steady service sustains operations decade after decade. Records indicate he enjoyed theoretical discussions about tactics, would spend free time analyzing historical battles, identifying decision points, considering alternatives. Not obsessively, simply as preference, where some warriors prefer weapons maintenance or prayer, while others choose tactical study. He corresponded with brothers in other chapters, exchanging analyses of engagements, debating doctrinal applications. Small detail, but it suggests something about who he was, what he valued, how his mind worked. Now he burns. If the witnesses are correct, if the name they report seeing on that particular suit of Legion armor belongs to him and not to some other Amadeus, some coincidence of nomenclature, if any trace of the brother he was remains within the spectre that manifests at desperate battles. If remains is even correct word for describing relationship between who he was and what he has become. Does he remember tactical theory discussions? Does consciousness persist within that burning form, experiencing thought and memory, or has identity been completely effaced, leaving only combat reflexes animating corpse sustained by warp mechanics? When he manifests at battle, does he choose his actions or simply execute pre-programmed patterns, muscle memory given eternal form? Does he know he exists, or does existence happen to him without awareness, like dreams occur without dreamer? We cannot ask him, cannot establish communication, cannot determine what, if anything, remains of Brother Sergeant Amadeus inside the Legion Spectre bearing his name. We can only speculate, projecting ourselves into situation beyond human comprehension, trying to imagine experience so alien that imagination itself becomes inadequate. Imagine it anyway, attempt the impossible. Because even failed attempt at understanding serves purpose, forces us to confront what we have accepted, what we celebrate, what we pray for without considering fully what we are praying into existence. You are Amadeus. You have been Brother Sergeant for decades. Identity is stable. You know who you are. Warrior of the Firehawks, servant of the Emperor, defender of humanity. This knowledge is foundational. Everything else builds on it. Your tactics derive from it, your choices serve it, your existence has meaning because this identity provides meaning. Then the warp storm takes you. At first you maintain identity through discipline, through faith, through absolute refusal to let the chaos surrounding you dissolve the self you have spent centuries constructing. You are Amadeus, you are Firehawks. You will not break, will not surrender, will not permit the warp to unmake what you are. But time passes, subjective time, which might be seconds or centuries. The Geller fields fail progressively. You fight, kill, die, rise, fight again. Each cycle erodes something. Each death that should be final but isn't chips away at certainty about what death means, what life means, what distinction between them signifies. You continue fighting because fighting is what you do, what you have always done, what identity requires. But slowly the reason for fighting dissolves. You fight because you fought, because you are fighting, because fighting has become state of existence rather than purposeful action. Your body burns away, not quickly, slowly. Flesh transforming into something else, something that operates according to different principles. You feel it happening. Feel material form dissolving into patterns of energy and will. Feel the boundaries of self becoming permeable. Feel identity starting to diffuse, spreading out into the warp around you like a drop of ink in water. But you resist. Cling to identity with determination born from centuries of discipline. You are Amadeus, you are Firehawks, you will not dissolve, will not become just another warp current, just another pattern of chaotic energy. You enforce identity on yourself through will alone, using sheer determination as substitute for the biological substrate that normally maintains consciousness. This works. Partially, you maintain coherence, but coherence comes at cost. Everything not essential to maintaining identity burns away as fuel. Memories become vague, then fragmented, then gone entirely except for combat training, which serves survival and thus receives priority. Personality traits that once defined you dissolve because preserving them would consume energy needed for basic existence. Hopes, preferences, quirks, all the small details that made you individual rather than simply type. These evaporate, sacrificed to maintain core identity, warrior, firehawks, servant of emperor. But even that core erodes. Without memories to contextualize it, without personality to give it flavor, without biological substrate to ground it in material experience, identity becomes increasingly abstract. You know you are Amadeus, but you forget what that means. You know you are Firehawks, but the chapter becomes name without content, sound without meaning. You know you serve the Emperor, but the Emperor becomes concept without connection to anything comprehensible. You exist now as pure pattern, configuration of will and energy that maintains coherence through momentum rather than understanding. You are Amadeus because you have been Amadeus, because you will be Amadeus. Circular logic sustaining itself. Identity reduced to bare minimum, you are you, because you are you. Tautology is all that remains. Then comes manifestation. Something pulls at you, need, faith, some resonance between your pattern and material reality. You find yourself suddenly elsewhere, suddenly wearing armor again, suddenly surrounded by enemies who are suddenly dying. You fight. Of course you fight. Fighting is what you are now, all you are, the single behavior your pattern still maintains. You fight with perfect tactical precision because combat doctrine was essential to survival and thus preserved even when everything else burned away. The battle ends. You have saved Imperial forces, should feel satisfaction, accomplishment, purpose fulfilled. Feel nothing. Or feel something so attenuated that describing it as feeling is generous. There is continuation, there is coherence, there is the pattern that is you persisting rather than dissolving. This approximates satisfaction only in sense that survival approximates victory. Then you dissolve again, return to the warp, return to burning. Return to endless present where all battles exist simultaneously and separately and not at all. Time has become meaningless. You fight at Vilmarest in Corotani and 10,000 other places, but these are not different battles. They are the same battle manifesting with local variations. You are not experiencing sequence, you are experiencing superposition. All moments of combat coexisting, overlapping, interfering with each other like waves producing quantum probability distributions. This is your existence now, forever, always, without beginning or end because temporal concepts no longer apply to whatever you have become. You are Brother Sergeant Amadeus who enjoyed tactical theory discussions, and you are burning thing that fights forever without knowing why. And you are pattern of energy maintaining coherence through will alone, and you are nothing, and you are everything, and you are eternal, and you are dying, and you are these things simultaneously because. Contradiction has replaced consistency as organizing principle of your existence. Is this damnation? Is it salvation? The question has no meaning. These categories apply to beings experiencing sequential time, where damnation is bad future and salvation is good future. You do not experience future. You do not experience past. You experience eternal now, where all states coexist and battle is only constant, and identity is tautology sustained through determination that has long since forgotten its purpose. And somewhere, somehow, a tiny fragment might remain, might remember, might experience awareness of what it has lost, what it has become, what it will never be again. Might recognize that the pattern calling itself Amadeus bears no meaningful connection to the brother who carried that name 2 centuries ago. Might know that it has been sacrificed, not to necessity or enemy action, but to faith itself. To the absolute conviction that service matters more than self, that continuation of pattern matters more than continuation of person, that existing as weapon justifies any cost including complete destruction of everything that made existence meaningful. If that fragment exists, if awareness persists at any level, then damnation and salvation reveal themselves as identical. Then eternal service becomes eternal suffering, becomes eternal sacrifice, becomes eternal joke played by universe that transforms devotion into its own punishment. Then the Legion's manifestations represent not victories but perpetuation of horror, so absolute that ending would be mercy, but ending is precisely what faith will not permit. This is what we pray for, what we celebrate, what we invoke as proof of Emperor's protection. We pray for warriors to suffer eternally. We celebrate transformation that destroys identity. We invoke as blessing what is actually curse, so terrible that imagination can barely approach its outlines. Brother Captain Cortez commanded the strike cruiser Rapturous Rex. Records describe him as charismatic leader, rare among firehawks who prize tactical competence over personal magnetism. He could inspire, could rally, could make individual warriors believe their actions mattered, that their sacrifices served greater purpose, that honor and glory waited for those who fought with courage. He must have used these skills during the warp storm. Must have rallied his brothers, maintained morale, inspired resistance against impossible odds. Must have given speeches about duty and faith, about the Emperor watching their struggles, about refusing to yield regardless of what the warp threw at them. Must have been the reason the Firehawks maintained discipline and cohesion instead of fragmenting into individuals consumed by private horrors. His leadership doomed them, not intentionally, not through error or malice, simply through effectiveness. If he had not maintained morale, if brothers had succumbed to despair earlier, they might have died cleanly. Might have been consumed by daemons or dissolved into warp stuff, ending their suffering through defeat. Instead, Cortez kept them fighting, kept them believing, kept them resisting past the point where resistance had any tactical purpose, into the realm where resistance itself became pathology, where refusal to yield transformed into refusal to. Die transformed into transformation that made dying impossible. He created the Legion through his charisma, through his leadership, through his success at the very qualities that made him valuable as commander. The better he performed his role, the more thoroughly he ensured his brothers would experience fate worse than death. His greatest triumph, maintaining chapter cohesion through impossible circumstances, became his greatest tragedy, the act that guaranteed continued suffering for everyone he inspired. Does he understand this? Does awareness persist to recognize what he achieved, what he sacrificed, what he inadvertently created? Or has his identity been effaced along with all the others, leaving only pattern that continues inspiring, continues rallying, continues fighting battles in eternal superposition without ever knowing that his greatest victory was humanity's ugliest mistake? Sister Hospitaller Merava treated wounded from the Battle of Carrion Gulf, where the Legion had intervened against Chaos Incursion. Most injuries were standard, las burns, shrapnel wounds, blunt trauma from structural collapse, but 3 soldiers presented unusual symptoms. Burns that should not exist based on their reported positions during battle, psychological trauma distinct from standard combat stress. And strangest of all, persistent claims that they could still see the Legion members, watching from corners of the infirmary, present but not present, burning silently in spaces that contained nothing when others looked. Mariva consulted with tech priests, confirming no actual entities manifested in the infirmary. Whatever the soldiers perceived existed only in their awareness. But the soldiers insisted, described specific individuals, named positions where each Legion member stood, provided details that matched each other's accounts precisely, despite being kept in separated recovery rooms without opportunity for coordination. "They're still here," one soldier whispered to Mariva. "They never left. They're always here, always watching, always burning." We only notice during manifestations, but they exist continuously, simultaneously, at every battle they've ever fought and ever will fight. Time is illusion, they showed us, made us see, now we can't unsee. They're everywhere, everywhere, everywhen, always fighting, always burning, never ending, never. He died 3 days later. Cardiac arrest with no identifiable medical cause. The other two followed within the week. Mariva submitted report describing symptoms but could provide no explanation. The soldiers had not been physically near the Legion during combat, had not suffered warp exposure, had simply witnessed manifestation from relatively safe distance. Yet something in that witnessing had altered their perception, had granted them vision into truths that human consciousness could not sustain, had revealed patterns that knowledge of would kill. What did they see? What truth about the Legion's existence is so terrible that merely perceiving it causes lethal breakdown in human consciousness? Perhaps they saw what Amadeus experiences, the atemporal existence, the superposition of all battles, the infinite burning that exists not in sequence but in eternal now. Perhaps human minds structured for sequential experience, for linear causality, for time flowing past to future, simply cannot process this reality without suffering catastrophic failure. Or perhaps they saw something worse. Perhaps they perceived not just the Legion state, but the mechanism sustaining it. The faith current flowing from billions of believers, converging on these burning patterns, feeding their continued manifestation. Perhaps they recognized their own complicity, that their prayers, their legends, their celebration of spectral saviors contributed to perpetuating suffering beyond human comprehension. Perhaps they understood that every time they thanked the Emperor for Legion intervention, they were fueling the fire that tortures beings who can no longer even understand their own torment. Perhaps that realization is what killed them, not warp contamination or physical trauma, but guilt. The unbearable recognition that salvation requires maintaining warriors in state of infinite suffering, that every life the Legion saves is purchased with continued torment of beings who saved it, that the entire system is predicated on exploitation so absolute that acknowledging it honestly would require either abandoning faith entirely or accepting monstrousness as foundation of imperial survival. The Imperium cannot permit this knowledge to spread, cannot allow populations to recognize what their faith costs, cannot risk masses of citizens experiencing the revelation that killed those soldiers in Mariva's care, so it suppresses. Ensures that witnesses who see too much either die or disappear before they can communicate their visions widely enough to destabilize faith, system sustaining the Legion. This suppression is necessary, is monstrous, is both simultaneously without contradiction, because contradiction has become the organizing principle of imperial faith. We must believe in the Legion to sustain them. We must not understand what sustaining them means. We must celebrate their intervention while remaining ignorant about what intervention costs. We must maintain conscious ignorance, deliberately not asking questions whose answers would force impossible choices. Every imperial citizen who has heard Legion legends participates in this. Every priest who tells their stories, every soldier who prays for their appearance, every artist who depicts them in murals or sculptures, every administrator who classifies reports about their manifestations. We are all complicit in maintaining a system that tortures loyal warriors eternally. All guilty of exploitation we dare not acknowledge. All responsible for horror we dress as hope, the names we cannot speak. Not because speaking them is forbidden, though it sometimes is, but because speaking them requires acknowledging who they were, what they have lost, what we have taken from them. Brother Sergeant Amadeus, who enjoyed tactical theory discussions. Brother Captain Cortez, who inspired through charisma. Brother Leonid, who appreciated Terran music. These were people, individuals, beings with identities and preferences and everything that makes consciousness meaningful rather than simply functional. They are people no longer. Our patterns, our weapons. Our faith given form through transformation so absolute that nothing remains except capacity to serve. We cannot speak their names honestly without confronting what naming means. Recognizing individuals, acknowledging personhood, accepting that beings have value beyond their utility. The Legion cannot be permitted personhood, because personhood would require treating them as beings with rights rather than tools to be used. Cannot be acknowledged as individuals, because individuals can suffer, and we need to maintain fiction that their existence represents blessing rather than curse, so we maintain silence. Celebrate without understanding. Accept salvation without questioning its price. And the warriors who were brothers, Amadeus and Cortez and Leonid, and 10,000 others, continue burning, continue fighting, continue existing in state that should not be but is, that should end but cannot, that represents both humanity's desperate need for protection and humanity's capacity for exploitation dressed as devotion. They deserved better, deserved to die with honor, deserved to be remembered as the people they were rather than worshipped as the things they became, deserved release, rest, ending after centuries of faithful service, deserved peace. They received transformation into eternal weapons, received existence as infinite burning, received worship that perpetuates their suffering while pretending to honor their sacrifice, received everything except what they deserved. This is the arithmetic of salvation. The names we cannot speak, the prices we refuse to calculate, the costs we deny while demanding they be paid. The fire that consumes identity and calls itself blessing, the horror that wears hope's face and demands gratitude for atrocities committed in the name of protection, and we accept it, must accept it, cannot survive without accepting it. Because the alternative, acknowledging what we do to those who serve us most faithfully, would shatter the foundations of imperial faith, would reveal exploitation at the core of everything we claim to value, would force recognition that perhaps we are not worth saving if this is what salvation requires, so we do not speak their names, do not acknowledge their sacrifice honestly. Do not calculate costs we compel them to pay, we simply use them, pray for them, watch them burn and call it blessing and turn away before the flames reveal truths we lack courage to face. They burn for us, we burn them. The distinction matters less with each manifestation, with each battle, with each moment they continue existing because our faith will not let them die, because our need transforms their loyalty into eternal curse, because we have made salvation indistinguishable from damnation and called it righteousness. The names we cannot speak, the truth we dare not acknowledge. The price we demand while refusing to calculate its sum. This is what faith costs when pushed to extremes. This is what loyalty becomes when surviving means transforming devoted servants into things that exist in eternal agony while maintaining fiction that agony is glory. And still they manifest, still they burn. Still they fight our battles and save our lives and perpetuate our civilization while experiencing horror beyond comprehension. Still they serve because we will not let them stop, will not grant them ending, will not accept that sometimes the most merciful act would be allowing faithful warriors to finally die instead of perpetuating their existence as burning patterns sustained by faith that has become indistinguishable from cruelty. They are the legion of the damned, and we have damned them, not the warp, not chaos, not the accident of being lost in that storm. We have damned them through our need, through our faith, through our prayers that sustain their manifestation and prevent their rest. We are the true architects of their suffering. We are the ones who will not let them die. And we call this blessing, call this protection, call this proof that the Emperor watches over the faithful. Never acknowledge that perhaps the Emperor watches with horror at what we have made, what we celebrate, what we perpetuate in his name, while refusing to recognize monstrosity hiding behind rhetoric of salvation, the names we cannot speak, because speaking them means acknowledging persons, and persons require more than use, require recognition of their suffering, require honesty about costs we impose, require admitting that maybe some sacrifices should not be demanded regardless of how desperately we need what they provide, but we need them, cannot survive without them, so we will not speak their names, will not acknowledge their personhood. We'll continue using weapons we pretend are angels, continue celebrating suffering we pretend is glory, continue damning loyal servants while insisting we honor their sacrifice. This is the Imperium. This is faith. This is what we are, what we do to those who serve us most faithfully. What we have always done, will always do, must always do, because survival demands costs we dare not calculate honestly. The fire burns, the names remain unspoken, the truth stays buried. And Brother Sergeant Amadeus continues manifesting at battles across the galaxy, fighting with tactical precision that training preserved even when identity dissolved, serving faithfully even though serving has become everything and nothing simultaneously, burning eternally because our faith will not grant him peace. He deserved better. They all deserved better. We know this. We choose exploitation anyway, because we must. because acknowledging what we do would require either changing or accepting monstrosity, and the Imperium has never been capable of honest change, so the names go unspoken, the fire continues burning, and we call it blessed, call it holy. Call it anything except what it is, the price we demand from those too loyal to refuse, too faithful to die, too transformed to recognize they deserve better than eternal service purchased through infinite suffering. This is salvation. This is damnation. They are the same. We are its architects. And still we pray for them. Still we call them blessed. Still we refuse to speak their names honestly, because speaking them would mean acknowledging them. And acknowledgement would mean responsibility. And responsibility would mean confronting what we have made. And we lack courage for that confrontation. So silence endures. Names go unspoken. The Legion burns. And we call ourselves righteous while demanding they continue suffering for our benefit forever. Chapter 8. What burns at the end. There is a moment coming. We can feel it approaching like storm on horizon, like tremor before earthquake, like silence before detonation. The Legion's manifestations accelerate. The flames burn brighter. The temporal distortions intensify. Something is building toward resolution, toward threshold, toward ending or transformation or catastrophe that calculations predict but cannot define. Every augury points toward convergence. Every mathematical model suggests asymptote. Every pattern analysis indicates that current equilibrium cannot sustain indefinitely. The Legion exists in impossible state maintained through faith energy and will patterns and mechanisms too complex for full comprehension. That state is destabilizing. The contradictions accumulate. The requirements exceed available resources. The circle approaches the moment when it can no longer close, when the fire can no longer sustain itself, when something must change because continuation in current form has become literally impossible. What changes? What happens when the Legion reaches whatever threshold they approach? These questions have no certain answers, only possibilities. Only extrapolations from incomplete data, only informed speculation that must acknowledge its own uncertainty. Possibility 1, they dissolve. The faith energy sustaining them depletes past critical threshold. The patterns lose coherence. The manifestations cease. One day, the Imperium calls for salvation and nothing answers. The Legion simply stops existing. Their impossible nature finally succumbing to entropy they have resisted for centuries. The warriors find rest at last. The Imperium loses its spectral defenders. Faith reveals its limits, cannot sustain miracles forever, cannot maintain impossibilities indefinitely, cannot prevent eventual collapse of even the most desperately needed interventions. This would be tragedy, would demonstrate that even absolute faith is insufficient. Would force recognition that some things cannot last regardless of how badly we need them, that the universe imposes limits even on miracles, that eventually all debts come due and all borrowed time must be repaid. The Imperium would mourn, would classify the dissolution, would eventually weave the Legion's ending into new mythology proof that even blessed warriors can fall, that eternal vigilance cannot rely on eternal intervention, that humanity must defend itself rather than depending on spectral saviors. But would it be tragedy for the Legion themselves? Would dissolution represent defeat or victory? If any consciousness remains within those burning patterns, dissolution might be mercy. Release from existence that has become pure suffering, permission to finally stop fighting, stop manifesting, stop existing in state between all meaningful states. Death deferred for centuries finally granted. Rest earned through service that exceeded all reasonable demands. Perhaps this is the ending they desire, if desire remains possible for beings so transformed. Perhaps the acceleration represents not desperation to persist, but urgency to reach conclusion. Perhaps they approach the threshold deliberately, consciously, having made whatever passes for choice in their atemporal existence. Perhaps they fight with increasing frequency, not because they must, but because each battle brings them closer to accumulated damage or energy depletion that will finally end what should have ended centuries ago in that warp storm. Possibility 2, they transform. The threshold is not ending, but transition. The patterns reorganize at fundamental level. The Legion becomes something different, something new, something that operates according to different principles with different requirements and different relationships to both warp and materium. They persist, but not as they have been. They continue manifesting, but not for humanity. They exist still, but serving purposes we cannot comprehend because those purposes transcend the limited frame of imperial benefit. This possibility is more terrifying than dissolution, because transformed legion might be hostile. Might view humanity as exploiter, as jailer, as tormentor who perpetuated their suffering through thoughtless faith. Might manifest at battles to kill both sides rather than saving imperial forces. Might become predators feeding on faith energy without reciprocal service, taking what they need from those who once sustained them without providing any benefit in return. Or transformation might be more subtle. Might preserve the Legion's service to humanity while fundamentally altering what they are, how they operate, what they cost. Might represent evolution from current impossible state into something more stable, more sustainable, more capable of indefinite persistence. They would still fight chaos, still protect humanity. But as beings fully transitioned into whatever they have been slowly becoming, no longer partly human but entirely other, no longer recognizably connected to Firehawks they were, would this be better? Would transformed Legion that serves humanity without human connection be improvement over current state, or would it represent final defeat, complete erasure of whatever remained of the warriors they were, total transformation into alien entities that serve humanity only because their nature happens to align with human interests, rather than any residual loyalty or lingering connection to oaths made before transformation? We would use them anyway. This is certainty, regardless of which possibility materializes. Whether the Legion dissolves or transforms, whether they remain loyal or become hostile, whether they serve humanity or themselves, the Imperium will find way to use them, will adapt strategy to new reality, will exploit whatever opportunities their new state provides, will classify the transformation, will develop new mythology, will continue demanding that faith work miracles and warriors sacrifice beyond all reasonable limits, because that is what the Imperium does, what it has always done, what it must do to survive in a galaxy that wants humans extinct. Possibility 3, nothing changes. The threshold is illusion. The acceleration is noise rather than signal. The Legion continues existing as they have, manifestation frequency fluctuating but never reaching actual crisis point. They persist indefinitely, sustained by faith mechanisms that prove more robust than calculations suggest, operating through principles that remain opaque to human analysis but nonetheless function. The storm everyone anticipates never arrives. The ending never comes. The fire keeps burning. This might be most terrible possibility, because it means no resolution, no ending to the suffering, no transformation to something potentially better, or at least different, just continuation, eternal continuation. The Legion manifesting forever, fighting forever, burning forever, existing in state that should not be but is, serving humanity through eternal sacrifice that no one acknowledges honestly. This possibility suggests that some forms of suffering have no resolution, that some contradictions cannot be resolved, that some situations simply persist without ending or transformation, maintained by equilibriums too stable to collapse but too terrible to celebrate. The Legion would remain exactly what they are, humanity's greatest defenders and greatest shame, proof of faith's power and faith's horror, beings that exist because we need them to exist and suffer. Because we refuse to acknowledge costs of that need, forever. No threshold, no transformation, no dissolution, just endless continuation of impossible existence, eternal burning at the intersection of salvation and damnation, perpetual service without reward or recognition or possibility of rest. This is the cruelest possibility, and perhaps the most likely. Because the universe has never demonstrated preference for narrative satisfaction over simple persistence. Reality does not resolve, it continues. And the Legion, as beings existing at reality's edges, might simply continue with them. But something is changing. The evidence is overwhelming. The manifestation frequency doubles every 17 months according to Administratum records. The temporal distortions worsen measurably. Witnesses report phenomena that suggest the Legion's coherence is degrading, individual warriors flickering between states, armor showing damage patterns from battles not yet fought, flames burning in colors that do not exist in normal electromagnetic spectrum. Magos Kronos of the Order Malios deployed experimental temporal sensors at predicted manifestation sites. His readings confirmed what witnesses described. The Legion exists increasingly out of phase with normal causality. They manifest slightly before they should, fight battles that overlap with themselves temporally, exist in superpositions that quantum mechanics suggests should be impossible at macro scale. They are coming unstuck from time, Kronos wrote in his final report, before the Inquisition ceased his research and reassigned him to penitent duties, not metaphorically, literally. The mechanisms maintaining their temporal coherence are failing. Soon, within decades at most, they will exist at all points in their history simultaneously. Past, present, future will collapse into single eternal moment. They will fight every battle they have ever fought, and ever will fight a single continuous engagement. And then, the report ends there. Kronos either did not complete the thought, or his conclusion was redacted. But the implication is clear: when temporal coherence fails completely, when the Legion exists in all moments simultaneously without any anchoring to sequential experience, they will cease to be beings and become phenomenon. Pure event. Eternal battle without combatants. Eternal burning without anything to burn. Eternal manifestation without anything manifesting. They will become the fire itself. Not warriors wreathed in flames, but flames that remember being warriors. Not consciousness experiencing existence, but existence approximating consciousness. The final transformation, where everything that remained of the Firehawks dissolves into pure pattern, pure event, pure eternal, now of combat without beginning or ending or any meaningful progression. Is this ascension or annihilation? The question becomes meaningless when the categories it presumes, being versus non-being, existence versus non-existence, no longer apply. The Legion will continue being, but being will mean something so alien to human experience that we lack language to describe it accurately, and they will still fight, still manifest, still burn. Because burning and fighting and manifesting are what they are, not what they do. The distinction between subject and action will have collapsed. They will not be warriors who fight. They will be fighting that approximates warriors. Will be the eternal act of defense given quasi-stable form through faith patterns, too complicated to dissolve even when the identities they once sustained have long since burned away. This is what waits at the end, not dissolution or transformation in any conventional sense, but apotheosis, becoming fully what they have been partially becoming for centuries, transitioning from beings who exist impossibly into impossibility that exists as being. The Legion will achieve final state, stable configuration that can persist indefinitely because it has transcended all the limitations that make persistence difficult for. Entities still partially bound to material or temporal constraints, they will be eternal, immortal not through continued life, but through having transcended the category where life and death have meaning. They will exist forever, fighting humanity's battles across all time simultaneously, manifestations that are not separate events, but aspects of single eternal event viewed from different temporal positions, and they will suffer. If suffering remains possible for beings so transformed, if experience persists in any form recognizable as consciousness, they will be trapped not just in endless service, but in service that has no temporal dimension, where every moment of pain and combat and burning exists eternally, where the distinction between one battle and the next dissolves into eternal superposition of all battles. This is the fire at the end, the conclusion toward which every pattern points, not ending, not transformation into something better or even different, but completion, becoming fully what partial transformation began. The Legion will achieve final form, and that form will be horror beyond human comprehension, beings who have transcended being itself and become pure function, pure service, pure eternal combat, without any of the context that makes combat meaningful. Should we mourn this? Should we celebrate it? The questions presume we have choice in whether to approve or condemn. We do not. The Legion's trajectory is determined by forces we do not control, by faith mechanics and walk dynamics, and the inexorable mathematics of their impossible existence. They approach threshold whether we acknowledge it or deny it, whether we approve or condemn, whether we understand or remain ignorant. All we can choose is how we respond, what we learn, what we acknowledge about what we have done, what we have made, what we have sustained through our collective need and faith. Commander Tyrion of the Cadian shock troops survived encounter with the Legion at the Battle of Mordion's Edge. Chaos forces had breached the fortress monastery, were slaughtering defenders, were moments from corrupting sacred relics that would amplify their power beyond containment. The Legion manifested, fought with fury that transcended tactics, killed everything tainted, protected nothing except the relics, vanished before thanks could be offered. Tyrion watched his brothers die. Not from chaos forces, those had been annihilated. From the Legion's collateral fire. From being in wrong positions when spectral warriors deployed flamers without checking firing lanes. From structural collapse caused by Legion combat patterns that prioritized enemy elimination over civilian infrastructure protection. 23 Cadians died, the relics were saved. The Legion judged this acceptable arithmetic. I wanted to hate them, Tyrion later confessed to Regimental Priest. Wanted to rage against spectral saviors who care so little for those they save. But I couldn't, because I understood they are not cruel. Cruelty requires choosing to inflict suffering. They do not choose, they execute. They are weapon we have made, tool we have shaped, pattern we have sustained. We created them through our faith. We maintain them through our need. We are responsible for what they are, what they do, what they cost. If my brothers died from Legion fire, the blood is not on spectral hands, it is on ours. On every imperial citizen who prays for salvation without calculating its price. On every priest who tells Legion legends without acknowledging the horror. On every commander who welcomes their intervention without accepting responsibility for collateral damage. This recognition is rare. Most prefer to maintain comfortable distance between imperial need and Legion actions, prefer to celebrate their victories without acknowledging their costs, prefer to pray for intervention without accepting culpability for what intervention requires. But Tyrion saw clearly, recognized that the Legion is mirror-reflecting imperial nature. We claim to value loyalty, to honor service, to protect those who defend humanity. The Legion proves these claims hollow. Shows that we value victory over loyalty, service over servants, protection of civilization over protection of individuals. Shows that when forced to choose between acknowledging costs and maintaining comfortable lies, we choose lies every time. The Legion is what we are. What we have always been beneath rhetoric and propaganda. They are the Imperium's id made manifest pure function without conscience, pure service without compassion, pure execution without consideration of cost. They fight as we wish we could fight, without moral complications or strategic hesitations. They are perfect weapons precisely because they have been stripped of everything that makes weapons wielders rather than tools. We made them, not intentionally, not through conscious design, but through collective faith that demanded miracles without counting costs, through prayers that imposed infinite obligations on warriors who had already given everything. Through need so absolute that it transformed loyal servants into burning patterns sustained past all reasonable limits. We made them through our desperation, through our refusal to die without fighting, through our insistence that faith must work miracles even when miracles require suffering beyond comprehension. And we will make them again. Not literally, the specific circumstances that created the Legion probably cannot be duplicated. But metaphorically, spiritually, we create new legions every day. Every time we demand more than people can give. Every time we celebrate sacrifice without acknowledging suffering. Every time we transform loyalty into weapon and call it honor. We create smaller versions of the same horror warriors pushed past breaking, service extended past ending, faith used to justify exploitation that should shame us. This is the Imperium, this is what we are, what we must be perhaps to survive in galaxy that wants us extinct. But survival does not make us righteous, does not justify every cost, does not absolve us of responsibility for what we demand from those who serve us most faithfully. The Legion burns, will burn forever after threshold is crossed, will exist as eternal fire that illuminates nothing, saves everything, costs everything, means everything, and nothing simultaneously. They are our greatest achievement and greatest atrocity. Our proof that faith works miracles, and our proof that miracles exact prices we dare not calculate honestly. What burns at the end? Everything. Nothing. The distinction no longer matters when the end reveals itself as transformation into state where endings and beginnings collapse into eternal present. The Legion burns, has always burned, will always burn. Is burning now across 10,000 battlefields simultaneously, fighting the same eternal battle manifested with local variations, existing in state beyond existence, where fire has consumed everything except the capacity to continue burning. And we watch, we benefit, we pray, we send them to our battles and call ourselves blessed when they arrive. We are the architects of their suffering, we are the beneficiaries of their service. We are complicit in horror, We refuse to acknowledge because acknowledging would require choosing between honesty and survival, and the Imperium has never chosen honesty when survival was at stake. So the fire continues. The names remain unspoken. The truth stays buried. The faith sustains manifestations that perpetuate suffering we dress as glory, and we call this righteous, call this necessary, call this proof of the Emperor's protection rather than proof of our capacity to exploit loyalty beyond all limits, and call exploitation blessing. This is what burns at the end, not just the Legion, us, our pretensions to righteousness. Our comfortable lies about honoring service and valuing sacrifice. Our faith itself, revealed as mechanism that transforms devotion into damnation while insisting the transformation represents ascension. The fire illuminates nothing. But perhaps illumination was never the point. Perhaps the fire exists not to reveal truth, but to distract from it. Not to show us reality, but to blind us to it. Not to guide us forward, but to keep us circling the same terrible patterns, generation after generation, demanding that warriors sacrifice beyond all limits while refusing to acknowledge what sacrifice costs. The Legion of the Damned, damned by us, through us, for us. Damned because we needed salvation, and they were loyal enough to provide it even after loyalty should have ended. Damned because faith transformed them, and faith sustains them, and faith will never let them rest. Because our need is infinite, and their capacity to serve has been made infinite through transformation that should never have been necessary. What burns at the end? Everything that should have been allowed to die. Everything we refused to let rest. Everything we transformed through our need and sustained through our faith, and destroyed through our refusal to acknowledge costs. What burns at the end is the truth we cannot face, that salvation and damnation wear the same burning face, that faith itself can be cruelty when pushed to extremes, that the Imperium's greatest defenders are also its greatest victims, sacrificed not to necessity, but to our unwillingness to admit that some prices should not be paid regardless of. How desperately we need what they purchase. The Legion manifests, the fire burns, the end approaches, and we pray for them still celebrate their intervention, still refuse to speak their names honestly, still maintain fictions that let us use them without confronting what using them means. This is the Imperium. This is faith. This is what we are, what we have made. What we perpetuate through collective choice to value survival over honesty, victory over virtue, continuation over conscience. The fire burns at the end, has always burned, will always burn, is burning now in eternal present where past and future collapse into single moment of infinite suffering dressed as infinite service, and we call it blessed, call it holy. Call it proof that the Emperor protects, never admitting that perhaps what we call protection is actually abandonment, that perhaps the Emperor watches with horror at what we have made in his name, that perhaps the greatest heresy is not denying faith, but wielding it as weapon against those most faithful, transforming devotion into damnation and calling it righteousness.